Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. Welcome to episode 30.
Which launches me right into my new segment.
Go.
Bad at numbers.
Nice.
So for 30, I'm going to try to keep it quick, but I've got a couple of cool ones. So first of all, the Roman numeral for 30 is XXX, which I pitched to you. We should make this a very racy episode, and I got shut down immediately.
Josh, this show is rated PG. It's a hard limit.
Oh, Ben, we're the one that makes these limits. That's fine. We'll have this discussion again some other time. Another interesting fact about 30 is that it is a cannonball number, meaning if you have a bunch of cannonballs that you need to stack into a pyramid, 30 cannonballs gives you 4 levels. There's 4x4 grid on the bottom, then a 3x3, then a 2x2, and then a 1 right on top.
Nice.
The last one, I want to talk about a date that doesn't or shouldn't exist, and that's February 30th. Okay? And, of course, everybody knows there is no such thing as February 30th. Except
right, what are you
was.
talking about February 30th?
But there was, and in my research, I went super deep into this one. I had so much fun with it. So apparently, back in the day, like way back in the day, we're talking like the 16th and the 17th centuries.
Okay.
Countries were starting to switch over from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar, which is, the Julian calendar was put into place by Julius Caesar back in, the BC era, whenever. And the Gregorian calendar was proposed by Pope Gregory the 13th in 1582. And here's the deal.
Yeah, it drove me nuts when I realized that the Latin roots for oct, nov, and dec were, 8, 9, and 10, and they got pushed out because of the vanity of Augustus and Julius. But yes.
Yeah, the Latin doesn't quite line up with anything anymore. But part of the reason is that we have a 365-day calendar, but there's 365 and a quarter days in a year.
Sure.
And that's what the leap day or the leap years are supposed to cover. Every 4 years we have an extra day because those quarter days add up into an extra day every 4 years, right?
Right.
That's the Julian calendar. Now we switched to the Gregorian calendar because there was a systemic error. Because there's not 365.25 days in a year, there's 365.2425 days in a year.
Okay.
So the Julian calendar was slowly getting us off track over the course of centuries. And so a bunch of countries started switching based on what the Pope said. Basically, it boils down to the Pope said, so we're doing it. And Sweden was about to switch over to the new calendar. In order to do that, all they had to do was basically take whatever day it was the current day and then skip forward 11 days. Like you would go to sleep and wake up and it would be 11 days later on the calendar.
Nice.
And that would catch you up and then you start using the same thing. But the problem was Sweden didn't want to do that. They didn't just want to skip forward 11 days. So they said, oh, here's an idea. Instead, we'll just skip the next 11 leap days. So if it's supposed to be a leap year, we'll just ignore it for the next 40 years. So from the year 1700 to the year 1740, they were just not going to have any leap years. And then they would be caught up and they would be good to go. Well, the problem was then this big war happened in Europe called the Great Northern War, one of the multitude of wars that Europe has had in their history. And I have this great graphic. It's like, what's the Great Northern War? And apparently everybody fought in it at some point. Britain switched sides at one point. Like, it's this whole giant thing. I didn't even want to go into it. But the punchline is they forgot to skip the leap years for the first handful of... Like, they had this plan.
They were too busy fighting the war, and they couldn't be troubled to add an extra day to the calendar.
Exactly. They completely forgot about it. And everybody just did the leap year thing like they were supposed to. And then after the war settles, then they realized, oh, crap, we were supposed to transition. And now they weren't on either calendar. They weren't lining up with the countries that were still on the Julian calendar, and they weren't lining up with the countries that were on the Gregorian calendar. So they called it off, and they decided, you know what, screw it, we're just going to skip. We're just going to add the extra 2 days, get us back on the Julian calendar, and we'll take care of it later. And they added 2 leap days in the same leap year, and so they went February 29th and then February 30th. February 30th, 1753 in Sweden. Wow. Oh, wait, no, that's not right. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. February 30th, 1712. There
okay. So there was actually a February 30th once in Sweden.
Yes. And then for a couple of years in like ancient Russia, but we're not going to talk about them.
Wow, that was fascinating. Good job.
I've actually received feedback that people actually hate this segment, which just makes me want to do it more.
No. Those people will come around. That was great. Okay, so also, there's something I need to follow up on from last time. So last time I introduced a concept, and I kind of talked about it vaguely because I couldn't remember the name of it. The concept is the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect, I brought it up in the context of knowing something and what your level of confidence is. So if you were to, I'll put a link in the show notes, but if you were to see this on a graph, just imagine an X coordinate and a Y coordinate. And on the X axis, you have your level of competence, and on the Y axis, you have your level of confidence. So what happens is early on in your learning about some new concept or idea, your confidence goes up very high very quickly. You just learn a few things. You're like, I can do this. I understand it. And it reaches what they call the peak of Mount Stupid, where you know just enough about something to be dangerous, but you don't really know that much about it at all. So your competence is low, but your confidence is high. And then from that point on, the more you learn about it, the more you realize what you don't know. And you go down into what they call the Valley of Despair, which lasts a long time, and as you slowly learn more and more and more and climb your way out until you reach what they call the plateau of sustainability. So
I love that they have all of these terms for the different points on this made-up shape that they drew on a chart.
Yeah, well, when I try to think of things where I'm there, like for instance, right now I kind of have this thing for Frisbee golf, and I feel like I'm right on the peak of Mount Stupid. Like, I bet if I went out right now, I'd be absolutely horrible at it, but I feel like I know everything there is to know. What's something I'm in the Valley of Despair about? Probably sumo wrestling. I've really had a thing for sumo wrestling for about 5 years, and I'm just way down there where I just realize how much there is to know and how little I actually know. Slope of Enlightenment, I guess I'm on there with Magic the Gathering. I'm learning more about it. I know how much there is to know, but I've got quite a bit under my belt, but I can see the path to the top. Plateau of Sustainability, I think the only thing I'm really there on is like I said in our episode where we did the quiz show, that Latter-day Saint doctrine.
Yep. Not surprising at all. I want to rename the Valley of Despair. I'm going to call mine. Anybody, like, I'm not despair. I do not despair ever, Ben. I'm going to call it the Valley of Apathy, because the only reason I would be down there is if I gave up and didn't care about the subject, right? I think I'm in the Valley of Apathy when it comes to cars.
Uh-huh.
Like, at one point I felt like I remember I was like a kid, like 12 or 13 years old, and I helped my dad change the oil in one of our family cars.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I walked out of that experience like, oh yeah, cars are totally easy. I got this. And, man, and then the first time you have a car as a teenager and something happens, or you break down to the side of the road and it doesn't start, and you open the hood, like everybody does, you walk around, open the hood, and you look at it with your hands on your hips, you go, wow, I have no idea how any of this works.
Yeah. So just last week, my 15-year-old son asked me how the car works, and I had some time, so we opened up the hood and I showed it to him. And one of the things I was realizing is so crazy about it is if you do a cross-section of an engine block, there's 3 fluids flowing through it that have to remain completely separate. You've got oil flowing through the top and bottom, air and gas flowing through the middle, and water flowing around all of it. And never the twain shall meet.
And what's interesting about that is Nicole and I are talking about that if we get another car someday in the future, I'm of the opinion that our next family car that we buy is going to be an electric car.
Nice.
And I'll tell you what, if you take an internal combustion engine car and an electric car and put them next to each other, and you have a little kid and they go, how does the car work? It's going to be a lot easier to explain the electric car than it is going to be explain this has explosive chemicals that explode here, but it's okay because then we catalyze them into less volatile gases in this other thing. Like, it's crazy when you think about it.
Yeah.
This goes in a tangent that has no bottom. But like, the last thing I want to throw out is the difference between LCD screens and cathode ray tube monitors.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like an LCD, like an LCD monitor is just an XY grid. Every pixel, you just tell it what color to be, and then you get a picture, right?
Right.
That makes sense. But a cathode ray tube, we blasted high energy from the back of the monitor and used this ring of magnets with an analog signal to bend the waves as they came through to hit a surface that luminesced based on how the energy was hitting it. Like,
in a scan, hurt a number of times every second.
And how did we figure that out before LCDs, Ben? It makes no sense.
There's probably a reason to that, but I'm definitely in the Valley of Apathy on that one.
Fair enough. Sorry for the tangent.
So to tie a bow on that one, in the field of psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias in which people with a low ability at a task overestimate their ability, which is related to the cognitive bias of illusory superiority that comes from the inability of people to recognize their lack of ability. This one's easy to understand. Like the fact that everyone thinks of themselves as an above-average driver, which is kind of an oxymoron.
Well, I am an above average driver, but I can quantify that. I can quantify
How do you quantify how good you are at driving?
I've never been in a collision accident.
I was in the car with you when you were in a collision accident.
When was I in a collision? Whoa. Oh, tell this story because I don't recall this at all. Oh. Nope, we're not going to tell that story on the podcast. I've only ever been in one collision accident. Oh dear. Can we edit this whole part out? Wow, I sound stupid on that one. All right, well, let's put a bow on that and moving on.
All right, it's time for a little bad at English. Okay, so this is one that kind of occurs casually in conversation in the UK. We don't really have a good equivalent of it. The word is fair shout or good shout. It's something that someone will say in response in a casual conversation. Like, for instance, if I said, "Hey, how about we go get some dinner before we go to the cinema?" And he'd say, "Fair shout," which means, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea."
So it's just like an assent or just acknowledged and approved over here.
Yeah, or if, let's say, one of our friends just got a medal and I saw him and said, "Hey, Harry, good job getting that medal," and someone else said, "Yeah, good shout," which means like, yes, I affirm that and agree with it.
I want to tack on, but I don't want to say any more words.
Right. So good shout or fair shout. It's just kind of like an affirmation of something.
That's interesting because you're always talking about how like the British have very elaborate insults and they go like layers and layers deep on how to make fun of people. And then this is a way to make it super easy not to have to say something good about somebody. If somebody else says something good, then you just go, "Oh, yeah, what he said.
Good shout."
And it's like it sounds like the British are way better at being mean to people than they are being nice to people.
I would definitely agree with that. Okay, that's all I have for bad in English today.
Okay, you mind if I take over and do a segment real quick?
Go for it.
Okay, so this is, I don't know, we're bad at everything, so let's call this bad at gaming. As you may or may not know, and our listeners may or may not know, I'm a recovering and constant battle with the World of Warcraft addiction that I have.
We're going to do a full interview at some point in time. I'm going to delve into this universe.
I've been clean for like years at a time, only to fall, neck deep back into it, where I'm looking at, optimizing builds and spreadsheets and collecting log data.
Wow.
It can get bad. I haven't slipped that far down the rabbit hole this time. I haven't chased the dragon that deep, but
where are you on the Dunning-Kruger confidence competence scale with World of Warcraft?
Oh, escalating. Because at one point, back in the day when I was still in college and it first came out, I was at the peak plateau, man. I was like top tier, peak performance. But then I tried to get out of it for years, and the game changes.
So it's a perishable skill, and it perished a bit.
A bit. It's kind of the same thing that happens with Magic the Gathering. The reason you play all the old cards and don't like the new cards is because you just want to play the old stuff. But they changed everything. It's all new, and like, I don't have time. I'm too old for this crap.
There's a bit more to it than that. I mean, they're introducing new content to kind of increase the replayability and keep it fresh, and that requires you to constantly continue to learn new things.
That's exactly what's happening here. And instead of learning these new things, I just lean back on, I'm just going to do the stuff that's fun.
Okay,
anyway,
sorry, I derailed you.
No, you're totally fine. So here's the thing, Ben. Here's the thing. This last iteration, because of COVID-19, like I got my wife kind of into it, and then my son, who's just old enough to start to be able to read consistently, and you need to be able to read to do this game. So he started playing a little bit more. Like he definitely, like when he plays by himself, he's okay, but it's better, and we all have a better time if somebody's there holding his hand. So like my wife and I will alternate playing with him, or my wife and I will play together, and it's just kind of this fun thing that we've been doing. But this is a game where it's an RPG, and you're killing things, and you're doing quests, and you're trying to get gear. Like the primary gameplay loop is you're trying to make your character better. You want all the numbers to go up, so then you can make your numbers go up faster and better. And
isn't that a self-licking lollipop?
Well, yeah, and I recognize that that's what it is, and it's this whole psychological thing. Like we can have a whole discussion about the psychology of why we play games that we can see through, but that's not what we're talking about. There is a thing in the game called mounts, where it just all it does is it increases your character's movement speed, and like you
Sure.
push a little button and your character fiddles for a second, and then like a horse or a bird or
Your
a giant
gallant
lion
steed.
or
Sure.
a dragon, like, and this is the thing is they all have
So
exactly
the
the same
word
effects.
mount means something you ride to go faster.
Yes, and that's it. And they all have exactly the same effects. They do exactly the same things. But there are hundreds of different mounts in the game, and it turns into like kind of this status symbol thing that you do.
Sure.
It's like you're hanging out with all the other players in the main areas, and you'll always see people there like getting on and then getting off all of their different mounts, just kind of flexing
Sure.
on.
This happens in the real world with cars.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your mount? Yeah.
So there I was, like knee deep in the Volpira Desert with my wife, and we had a quest for that day. We had to go kill this guy out in the desert somewhere, and it's a rare quest. It only comes up like once every 6 weeks. This guy appears, okay, and we've never done it before because we're just getting back into it. And when we get there, we realize this thing is like a boss. It's like it's going to take like a whole group of people to take this thing down. And we're like, oh, what do we do? Well, while we were sitting there discussing our options, like 6 other people from the other side of the map just kind of tackled him. And so we're like, we're getting on this. And so there's this giant dog pile of people into this, onto this boss, right? And
Leroy Jenkins.
Basically, that's what happened. And it's like, well, they could probably kill him, so let's go get some of the credit. And so we dive in and we help out. And it's for me, it's fun. Like, it's just this melee, and there's buttons blinking and numbers flying everywhere, and there's giant. I had a good time doing it. And then when he dies, and then everybody gets like a couple of pieces of loot off him because it's this boss character. I got a couple of things that are like, oh yeah, it's fine, whatever. And then my wife goes, "What's this thing?" And I lean over to her computer, and she got a mount. I'm like, "Oh, you got a mount from this guy? That's awesome."
Is that rare?
This is the thing, Ben. So then I look up, like she mounted it, and it's she mounted the mount that she got, and it's this completely unique llama that I have never seen in the game before ever. And like I said, I've been in and out of this game for a very long time, and I have never seen anyone riding this llama. I'm like, what the crap? And I look it up. That boss only spawns once every 6 weeks. He has a 1 in 1,000 chance of dropping that mount. He is the only one in the game that does so. And of all the people that were killing the thing, it had to randomly select who was going to get it.
Okay.
And it was Nicole got this llama. And I was so, at the time...
So this is ultra rare.
It's like super ultra rare. Like I to this day, I've not seen anybody else riding this mount. Okay. And she likes it because it's cute. And if you're standing still and you push the space bar, it like dances in a circle with your character on top of it.
Is
so
it
does
good
like this
or just unique?
It's the same. It gives you exactly the same stat boost as every other mount in the game.
Okay.
It's just totally unique.
I didn't understand that part. So you're saying anyone with the mount gets the mount bonus. There's not like a hierarchy of goodness of mounts.
That's right. There's only a hierarchy of rareness.
Okay, so then just your mount is just a status symbol because yours is rarer than someone else's, or
that's right.
Is cool or cute or whatever.
Look how lucky I am. Look how much I play this game. Look how much money I spent to buy this thing. Whatever the circumstances.
Sure.
But like when she got it and I realized that, I'm like, wow, that's awesome. That's great, honey. And like 90% of it was like, yay, good for you, and 10% of it was like, it should have been me. But I'll tell you what, that
sense of entitlement.
that 90-10 split keeps swinging more and more the other way because she will deliberately, like I said, you like go to these areas and you mount up just to flex, just to show it off. She doesn't show off to anybody in the game but me. Every time we go somewhere, she's like, man, this mount is so much fun. I like be jumping and doing, and just, she has literally, while I'm trying to do something, mount up and then just go in a little circle around my character on this mount just to drive me, drive me nuts.
Nicole, you rock. What you're describing reminds me of a classic scene from a movie from the 80s. So I know this is before your time, but I'm sure you've seen The Karate Kid. So there's this scene where Miyagi's sitting in his dojo, and he's got a pair of chopsticks, and there's a fly buzzing around his head, and Miyagi's trying to catch it with the chopsticks, and Daniel starts asking him about it. He's like, what are you trying to do? He's like, catch fly with chopstick. He's like, have you ever caught one? He's like, no. He's like, well, how long have you been doing it? He's like, entire life, which, I don't know, he's supposed to be 60 or something like that. And Daniel picks up a pair of chopsticks, and he's like, Mr. Mr. Miyagi, I got it.
Yeah. So, yeah. It's getting to this point where she'll like, oh yay, look, it's my llama, and then it just my teeth just grind.
You need to look over her, get completely zen, and go, beginner luck.
And you know what? Like, I was getting to the point where I was suppressing it. I was pushing it all down, and like, it's fine. It's good for her. It reinforces playing the game, and we're just having fun. It's great. And then she got another one.
What?
Like we were doing something else, and then we just, as a random drop off of a mob that we killed, she got a flying carpet mount.
Is that good?
I mean, it does exactly the same thing as every other mount that flies in the game. Like, if it's a bird, if it's a dragon, who cares? But it's a carpet like from Aladdin that she like surfs on, and it's, again, it doesn't have any extra bonus. It's just totally unique, and I don't have one. And she keeps, like, now the llama is her default running mount, and the flying carpet is her default flying mount. Just to grind my gears, Ben. Oh,
well, I would want those if I got them. They're really cool. So would you.
And then, a couple days later, I was playing with my son, and my son plays on my account. So when my son plays, my wife and I tag out on her account. Uh-huh. And so I sat down on her account, and my son is playing my account.
Were you doing laps around him in the llama and the magic carpet?
I was definitely riding the llama every chance I got, and the flying carpet every chance I got. But then we're killing mobs again just to do the quest for his character. And he gets a custom hyena mount that drops off of somebody. This one's not nearly as rare, but still, I'm just like, now I'm just beating my head against the desk. Like, just what game server admin has it out for me? Like, they're tracking who's playing what, and just like, it's this guy.
You really know that it's just numbers and random. There's no conspiracy.
I'm 0 for 3, man. Like, I mean,
people want to believe this. This is a psychological phenomenon. I bet I can find it. I'll put a link to a sketch on YouTube or something where there's like the guy and he's standing in line in the grocery store and he looks at the next line over and it's moving really fast, and so he switches over to that line and then it stops and then the line he was in starts moving like that. You know, it feels like the fix is in, but it's random.
This is a totally psychological thing. It's like the reverse confirmation bias thing. Like, I'm the first person to talk about how confirmation bias is the source of all perceived magic in the world. Like, I understand what you're saying, but it just feels like I can't get that little part in the back of my brain. If we're looking at Inside Out, there's always that rookie second lieutenant in the back of the command center going, hey, that's a really cool llama mount. We should have got that. I don't know why they got it. They don't respect the game. They don't play. They haven't poured thousands of hours into this. They don't deserve it.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Put him at the controls.
So, like, in our show notes, I have several swear words when I listed these out because I couldn't stop myself from typing the swear words as I was listing the notes. But just so much frustration.
I'm sure it's a very nice llama.
I'll get a picture of it. And
I need a screenshot. There definitely needs to be a screenshot of Nicole's llama and Carter's hyena.
I will send you pictures of all three, and it will hurt me to do it.
All right. When we started recording, I told you I was a little bit upset, and I need to give a bad at parenting segment here.
Yeah, you were upset enough that you had to take like a Zen minute before we could start doing our thing.
Okay. So, Josh, as you know, I'm a very proud father of 6 children, and my wife and I have been very blessed with just very good children. They're healthy, they're strong, they're intelligent, they're successful. Not to say we don't have all the normal parental dilemmas. I mean, there were times when they were all babies and you know, one kid was throwing up and the other kid had taken off their diaper and smeared poo on the wall or whatever. You know, just all the nonsensical, crazy stuff you have to go through. Well, 2 of my children have already left home. One's on a mission right now, and the other one's off at college. And so the oldest child we have at home is my 17-year-old daughter, who's a senior in high school.
Trouble.
And yeah, I mean, she's a good girl. She's getting good grades. She's getting ready to go to college. She holds down a job. She gets up in the morning before school and goes to seminary. You know, she takes care of her life and does pretty well at most things. She struggled a bit with being a military child and moving so frequently and not having friends, which kind of factors into what happened tonight. So she was over at one of her friends' house that she's built, and I think partly due to the fact that I extended my tour here by a year beyond what it was supposed to be, because the Air Force offers a program called the High School Senior Assignment Deferral Program, which allows you to extend your tour by a year so that you don't have to move between the junior and senior year of your high school senior.
Well, it sounds like you fell into the perfect loophole because you're going to have a high school senior from now for the next 6 years. You can just keep extending to keep the senior in place.
Yeah, I could just stay here till it's time to retire. I could actually do that. But it has to be specifically that scenario, and there's 2 years between her and her brother in school, so actually, no.
It's 1 more year then.
Yeah. So what happened is she was over at her friend's house, and her friend told her, hey, in 2 weeks we're going to go to the beach for 4 days or whatever. I don't even remember what beach where. Maybe that one behind you.
Do I need to look up a map? Because I thought you were in Illinois.
Yeah. Yes. So this means traveling. Probably flying. Definitely. If it's a drive, it was going to be a heck of a drive. Staying in a hotel for a few days. So there's a lot of chaos and nuance to this, but my wife and I have, with all of our 6 children, have maintained a very strict no sleepovers policy throughout our children's lives.
Okay.
You're just getting to the age where that's going to start being a thing, and I've never asked you about this, so before I go on with the rest of my story, I'm interested in your opinions and thoughts on the matter. Like, have you and Nicole come up with a policy for the kids about sleepovers?
Ben, COVID-19, my children haven't left our house. I'm the only one that goes to the grocery store, so...
I guess I'm pretending that the world will go back to normal someday before your children grow old and leave the house.
I don't know. So I don't know because I recall as a boy, I didn't do many sleepovers, and at the time it was very nonchalant. So I have no idea what the mechanics that went on in the background. If my son asked me if he wanted to stay over at somebody's house, my first inclination would be why. See him tomorrow. I don't get it. So I don't know. That's a bridge that we haven't had to cross yet.
Well, what was your childhood like? Did you have friends that you would go sleep over at their house?
Every once in a while, occasionally, but
did
not
you ever
often.
have friends come back and sleep over at your house?
Rarely, but not often.
Okay. Well, I don't know. I guess maybe it was just the times, but my wife and I, both went through this in the late 80s and early 90s, where this was the prime time for this. Since her and I are only 4 weeks apart in age, we were born in the same month in 1977, and we both, throughout our experience of that, from the time we were probably about 9 till about 17, just had some really chaotic experiences, I'll say. Just after the sun goes down and you're a bunch of kids together, you just make bad choices. You break things, you do dumb stuff, and occasionally there's a little bit of experimentation that otherwise you just wouldn't have access to if you weren't creating this environment.
That's an excellent word for it, because you said that, and that jogged loose some of those memories that you don't want to keep or have ever again. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Like, for instance, she was over at one of her girlfriend's house, and her brother snuck into the room and said, hey, want a French? That kind of thing. That's not happening when the sun is up and the parents are awake.
That's true. And you see, this is weird because there's a whole spectrum of those, though, right? Because there's what we're talking about now is childhood shenanigans.
Yeah.
And where a lot of those, the majority of that bell curve, I would say can be formative and or educational and
Agreed.
Or a real world test of values. There is a small portion of that bell curve that is legitimately terrifying and life altering in a bad way.
Yes.
So I get what you're saying there.
And so, yes, you nailed it. And of that spectrum of childhood experience, the kind of things that happen on sleepovers has a higher than average propensity to be towards the dangerous, bad, not good things. So my wife and I just decided early on that we were going to have a no sleepover policy. There's always stuff that comes up that challenges it, like when they go to summer camp, or when we were in Europe, her high school class took a trip to Germany, and we've decided to make exceptions for those kinds of cases, but the exceptions are rare and very carefully chosen. So when she called us up from her friend's house tonight and said that they were going to be going to the beach for 4 days, and she wanted to go, I was trying to decide which bucket to put it in. Do we put this in the school trip bucket, or do we put it in the sleepover bucket? Because yeah.
Well, and I mean, there's a lot, like you were talking about at the beginning of this, there's a lot of logistical questions that you need to ask. Like, okay, so who else is going?
All right, hang on. This is an important one. So her friend is 2 years younger than her. She's a sophomore. this family has a child her age. It's a boy, and he's also a senior.
Okay.
That's
okay.
That's the main one.
It's not like a senior class trip. This is like a different family is going to the beach, and she was invited along.
Yes.
So the assumption there being that there's going to be a higher than average amount of chaperoning because both parents presumably will be there?
Yeah.
What are the lodging situations looking like?
We didn't go down this path. I didn't, I wasn't like, they'll have 3 hotel rooms and the adults will be in one and the kids will be in another. Because that's what I just don't see how they'll be in with the parents enough that I'll be satisfied. So I didn't even go down this path.
Oh, and that's completely valid. Like, if you go through, like, the different iterations in your head of how this could be logistically achieved in a way that satisfies you, and there just isn't one, then, yeah, the easy answer is no. But now, that does make you the bad guy with the 17-year-old girl in the house.
So, my daughter is a very sweet girl, and she's generous and kind and nice. And
I have this. All right, listeners, pay attention. This is what Ben Rich does right before he's going to say something, even the remotely, like, tiniest bit negative about somebody. He'll butter it up first.
So my wife says, hey, what are we going to do? Are we going to tell her it's too expensive, or and I'm like, no, any of those paths we go down just turn into an argument, and you and I are very much in agreement that this falls in the category of things that we're not going to permit. So I don't want to start like a debate over how she's going to pay for it, or whether the chaperoning is going to be adequate. We're not having a debate with her about this. We're making a parental decision, and we're telling her about it. So she texted me from a friend's house. I texted her and was like, hey, can you come back home so we can talk about this? And she's like, well, we're going to go to the park and stuff. And I'm like, listen, the answer's going to be no. This is your chance. Come back and talk. And she was home in like 5 minutes. So she walked through the door kind of knowing ahead of time what we were going to say. But my wife and I were very firm about the fact that we weren't going to permit it. And this was just kind of a chance for her to come to terms with it rather than debate it. And she's tried for a minute. Because, in 9 months she's going to be 18, but right. she's still a senior in high school. And just this week she's made a couple of bad decisions when she's out with friends. So, we don't need to have a debate. She tried to start the age-old parent-teenager debate of don't you trust me and that kind of thing, but we've just never, of course not. You're a teenager. All teenagers do stupid stuff. You're one of them.
You see, I was that's hilarious because you took that path, and my answer to that was, of course we trust you. It's the rest of the planet that we don't trust.
No,
like every other thing that exists in the universe, I have no trust for whatsoever.
No, I'll tell her to her face. I don't trust you either.
And you know what? I don't have a 17-year-old kid. I probably wouldn't trust them either.
Yeah. It's just an easier place to start from when you're having that argument. Not, I trust you, but I don't trust anyone else. Because then that turns into, like, how do we make that happen? And I didn't want to have that talk. So then the tears start. Oh, my gosh. It didn't make me want to change my mind, but, it made it so hard. So my wife and I both just firmly told her no, and she cried. And then she tried a couple more times to find another path. But she didn't get angry. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She's not looking for a way out. She just kind of had to cope with it. And then she left and went back to her friend's house, and I hope she doesn't hate me.
Oh, come on. She'll get over it. She's 17 years old. And all she has to do is run out the clock, and then she can make all the bad decisions that she wants.
Yeah. We kind of had that talk, too. I mean, in 9 months, she'll be 18. Yeah.
So what's funny is that the crying thing, the girls crying, I remember as a younger man, I always thought to myself, it's not fair when girls cry because it just completely bypasses every defense mechanism you have as a man, and you just want to make it better. Like, I just want to fix the problem. What I've discovered is that doesn't really work with my daughter. Like, if and when my wife cries, which is like, there's a lot of things that have to happen. Like, Saturn's got to align perfectly with like the lunar phases. It's a rare event, but I'm still in that mode of like, oh dear Lord, what can I do to fix this thing? But when my daughter cries, like, it doesn't have the same effect in my brain because I know, and like all my alerts go off, and it's like this little thing is trying to manipulate my emotions to get what she wants. And she tried to pull it today. Nicole made a delicious dinner that we have not ever had before, and Jane took one bite of it and like put her spoon down and like slouched back in her chair away from the food, and like put that grumpy face on. And I leaned into her and I'm like, so right now you need to adjust your attitude because this is your dinner. So you need to accept that and eat it. And then like you could see her start to well up and the lower lip jutted out just a little bit and start quivering. And I'm like, oh no, that's not how this goes. Nothing you do is going to change my mind, you little emotional terrorist.
Yeah. Well, my daughter's still my little girl, but I also take very seriously my commission to protect her as much as I do want to make her happy. And those two things were at odds in this discussion, and ultimately I decided to take the path of firmly sticking by our long, well-proven policy.
Okay. Well, it's unfortunate that she doesn't get to go to the beach with her friends, family. Yeah, but that whole thing is weird anyway. Like, I would not invite a neighbor kid on a family vacation. That sounds terrible.
I'm not over it yet. Okay. Let's introduce a new segment. So
is it a new segment, or is this just going to be it's just going to be the topic we talk about this one time?
Well, we aren't just going to talk about this one time. We're going to establish this just like we have, because we've done this in the past. So in the past, when we have something, probably something related to games and intellectual properties that we find interesting, we establish the Bad at Magic rating system, where we figure out a way that we're going to process whatever it is, and so that we can give our unique angle on it to our listeners. So you and I can't even remember how this came up, but you and I were talking about politics, and you're like, "Hey, go ahead."
That's how it came up, is because you and I started getting really deep into real world politics, and at one point it snapped, and like we weren't arguing, but we were having, like, we both feel very strongly about our positions, and I realized this is way too heavy, and the world is just, we already have enough heavy stuff in the world. And so, like, how can we make this into a stupid, lighthearted, fun discussion?
Yeah. Okay. And so you're like, hey, let's come up with a rating system for governments and use it to rate governments, politics in our favorite intellectual properties. And I thought that was a great idea.
Yes. And then the conversation went from how, great and or terrible the political system is right now, depending on when you're listening, listeners. And it turned into how do we quantifiably, like, there's a qualitative aspect, but how do we put numbers, and how are we objective in, like, measuring the effectiveness or, like, the different aspects of an entire government in an intellectual property in a way that doesn't turn into a video essay about each specific individual one. Like, we need to be able to boil this down to an entertaining conversation that will be fun to have.
Yeah. Well, let's take 5 to 10 minutes and just kind of establish what we agreed on, and then we'll start using it as a lens to look at some of these things. So I did a bit of Googling, just looking to see if there was someone that had tried to tackle this from an academic perspective. Like, what are the elements of good governance? So I can't...
Yeah, spoilers, everybody. This is a problem that other people have thought about, being able to quantify the effectiveness of a government. This is a solved problem.
Yeah, so I found one that was a book by a guy named Naya Filran, in his 2009 book, Sustainable History and the Dignity of Man, A Philosophy of History and Civilizational Triumph. Like, if that isn't a 50-cent book title, I don't know what is. So he proposed 8 minimum criteria for ensuring good governance, which are participation, equity, inclusiveness, rule of law, separation of powers, free, independent, and responsible media, government legitimacy, accountability, transparency, and limiting the distorting effect of money in politics. Now, I know that was a big mouthful, and immediately you and I said, that's going to be too much.
Yes, that is too much, but it definitely gave us a direction. Like, that was a clear and good vector. Like, those 8 pieces, like, that sounds like a terrible book and it'd be super boring, but I am very interested in reading it just because that seems like an interesting debate to have about real governments. But we're going to talk about real governments. We're talking about fake governments. So let's boil that down. And so we took those 8 things and we kind of split them out into the big ticket items that we can easily discuss.
Yeah.
And so what we came up with was legitimacy. How legitimate is a government in any given circumstance? How effective is the government? And so that can be different depending on the stated goal of the government. So if the goal of the government is to provide freedom and security for everyone, or if the goal of the government is to oppress their people and enslave the galaxy, who knows? They could be super effective and super evil at the same time. It's completely amoral. And the last one, we had to have some kind of a moral aspect into it, was the lifestyle. So how would it be to live under said government?
Yeah. And I'd kind of add an extra one at the end. Like, okay, so is it legitimate? The first one, like, is, kind of yes or no. Like, is there a degree of legitimacy behind it? And we grouped some of those together that we talked about. Like, do citizens participate in it? Is there equity and inclusiveness? Is there the rule of law? Is there accountability, transparency? Or is there separation of powers? Is there a peaceful transition from one leader to the next?
Right, because many different forms of government can be totally legitimate. Like a monarchy or a democracy are totally different in how the government is formed and run, but they can both be equally legitimate.
Sure. If the tradition of the monarchy is that the oldest son of the ruler assumes rule when his father dies, then as long as they follow that rule, then it retains its legitimacy.
Exactly.
Okay. And then lastly, the free, independent, responsible media. So all those things kind of fall under the is it legit question. So the second one, effectiveness, like you said, it's amoral. Just does it get things done? Is it efficient? Is it stable? Does it achieve results? Does it win conflicts? Is it flexible in the respect of can it change to continue to retain its effectiveness? And is it predictable?
Right. And the way that we're going to have to be able to measure effectiveness, and the reason it is amoral, is because different governments have different stated goals. And so that's kind of the piece that, like, yeah, it could be totally and super evil and terrible to live under and totally illegitimate, but super effective at doing the thing that it says it's going to.
Right. And then for the last one, the lifestyle question, like, do the citizens have an opportunity to succeed? Do they have individual liberty and rights? Is there a social safety net? Do the people have an opportunity to achieve happiness or peace?
This is going to be the fun one, I think, for us to debate, because we have different levels of things that we believe are fundamental human rights versus nice to haves. And so this one is no yes or no answer. It's much, much more flexible. So this is where all the discussion is going to take place, I think.
Yeah, and so I kind of created a last question, which is, like, once we've established its legitimacy, its effectiveness, and its lifestyle, then the question is, would you like to live there?
Oh, that'll be fun.
Okay.
Big fan of that one.
All right, so we've got our three principles of good governance: legitimacy, effectiveness, and lifestyle, and then we'll evaluate if we would like to live under the government. So
right,
what
awesome.
do we got?
All right, so what we broke down is, we don't know how long we got for this. We don't know how long we're going to talk about each of these. So we came down to the core four, the big ones, the ones that everybody's aware of and knows about. No pre-studying required, no books to read, because everybody's got these. We got Star Wars, of course, our sci-fi universe. We have Star Trek, possibly at the other end of the spectrum of our sci-fi universe. We have Lord of the Rings. Like, you can't get more classic, fantastical than that. And then the last one I think we're going to try to do is Harry Potter.
Yeah. You're right. Those are definitely big, well-understood ones. Too fantasy, too sci-fi.
Yes. And then we have a couple more on our list. We'll see if we ever get to them or if it ends up being bonus content or whatever. Like you said, I don't know if this will become a segment. This might be something we come back to later on.
Yeah, well, like, in the future, we watch a new movie and we're trying to, we can do our usual, like, laws of magic kind of evaluation on it, but we could also take a minute and rate the government system in it as well.
Which would be just so nerdy and fun for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, those are good ones.
All right, spoilers for Star Wars, people, because we can't help it. Here it comes.
If you haven't seen Star Wars, prepare to be spoiled.
If you haven't seen Star Wars, well, watch the original trilogy and nothing else. Oh, and The Mandalorian. Watch the original trilogy and The Mandalorian, and you're good. Don't subject yourself to the crap that is the rest of it. Okay, so what's interesting with Star Wars is that for the real Star Wars nerds, there are multiple forms of government that we get to see in the movies. There's even more forms of government if you dig into, like, the books and the expanded universe and the comics and the role-playing games. But we're not going to talk about any of that stuff. We're going to talk about just the ones that we see in the movies.
I feel like it's right there in the title. Like, it's Star Wars. Like, if you're going to have a war, that's going to mean that there's governments and that there's a conflict between them.
Okay. So let's start with, unfortunately, the prequels. In the prequels, what we have is the Galactic Republic.
Yeah.
Sometimes referred to as the Old Republic, I think. Is that the same? It might be different. No, it might be different depending on the timeline.
Predecessor to the Galactic Republic.
All right, and that's expanded, so we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Republic that we see in the movies that some shadow organization is fighting against.
Back to Phantom Menace.
And where we get to... I love all of the reviews of the Phantom Menace where it's like, it's going to be an edge-of-your-seat kind of movie when the opening crawl starts talking about tax conflicts.
Yeah, and it was one of the weakest things, and yet George Lucas seemed so hell-bent on doing it. It's daunting to look at the Galactic Senate where you have this giant... I don't even know what to call it, tube full of like these floating things with senators on it that all have microphones, and it reminds you of watching C-SPAN, where you're just looking at the Senate and they're having procedural discussions about who's allowed to talk and taking minutes and roll call.
Oh, but it's got to be even worse because one, like whenever they do that pan around, that CGI pan of the Galactic Senate, there's got to be hundreds, if not thousands, of species represented in that building.
Yeah.
And we see in multiple times somebody is talking and then some other random representative will hit the button and make their platform start floating out and then he'll start talking on the mic. So there's clearly no control over who has the floor at any given time.
See, I'm convinced that Lucas was using his platform to kind of complain about government. Like, this is quite a few years ago. When did Phantom Menace come out? It was like 1999 or 2000 or something like that. But
I have no idea.
You could kind of feel in his depiction of the Galactic Republic as like trying to portray what the common frustration is with this kind of bloated, ineffective bureaucracy that's just mired in its own procedures.
Now, to be fair, that really feels like the peak of Mount Stupid when you start, like, if that's what you're going to see. If you watch C-SPAN, if the only exposure you have to civil government is watching C-SPAN for an hour, yeah, you're going to feel like, oh, well, this is clearly broken. This whole thing doesn't work. Well, there's reasons that it is this way. And so if that's his only view on the government, then...
Well, of course, approaching the climax of The Phantom Menace is the scene where Amidala escapes Naboo to go to the Galactic Senate and appeal for them to take action and come and end the siege on her planet by the Trade Federation. And the bureaucracy wants to open investigation to determine if it's even happening, let alone take decisive action while her people are dying in a war.
Which, to be completely fair, is something you can totally see happening in the UN. Like, that's a standard deflection. That's a standard deflection and stall tactic in a bureaucracy like this. Like, the people that are being accused, like, what are they going to do? Like, that guy, his whole job is to make them look good in the government. He's going to float up and be like, yeah, actually, we are totally besieging this planet and committing a lot of atrocities. He's going to use whatever bureaucratic loopholes and legal nonsense exist to push that can down the road.
Yeah, and they do a couple of those technological hand waves where, like, they have a scene where the Trade Federation is talking about how they're blocking transmissions from the planet so that no one can actually know what's going on there. But you feel like in that level of technology, when you have light speed and sentient drones, that you would be able to just like, well, hang on, let's look at the big screen and cut to the cameras on Naboo and see what's actually going on. Oh my gosh, there's a war going on. Yeah, maybe we should do something. Yeah,
like, hey, let me whip out my cell phone. Let's call one of our starfighter pilots that's in orbit. Hey, jump to light speed in Naboo for a second and like have him live. And like, oh yeah, there's totally a blockade here. I'm going to bounce before I get shot down. I'm like, okay, well, this has clearly been confirmed. Like, yeah, you're right. It's a very hand-wavy nonsense thing because in Star Wars, George Lucas wants it to be sci-fi, but he wants to have that super old tech feeling to it too. Like, he wants to have his cake and eat it too. It's like, oh, they're all spaceships and super advanced technology, but it's kind of old and crappy at the same time.
So I think what he was trying to depict is something we would relate to. Like, we would relate to this feeling of helplessness, of having, government bureaucracy have a debate about something that's clearly an established fact, and then because of it be indecisive and fail to help. And of course that leads to, Amidala going back and the plucky entrance of the Gungans to defeat the droid army and Anakin's moment of glory. It was all just, plot devices for the climax.
And meanwhile, to spur on this vote of no confidence in the current system, to get what's-his-face, who turns out to be Palpatine, escalated to the head of the government, Like it was this entire siege of a planet and the enslavement of a people was all just like one move of a pawn for Palpatine and this whole bigger
system. So that there would be this vote of no confidence in the Chancellor in the Galactic Republic Senate.
Right. So that now what we're talking about is kind of the slow, quiet coup of the Galactic Republic. So we can't get off of the Republic. We have to focus on what we know about the Galactic Republic, and we have to use the prequels. So when let's talk about legitimacy.
Okay.
I can't. There's nothing that's depicted in those movies that says the government is not legitimate. It seems.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It feels like there's due process, that there's elected leaders. I mean, there's a lot of the usual kind of corruption going on behind the scenes, but it feels like there's a general sense throughout the galaxy of legitimacy of the Senate in the Galactic Republic.
Yeah, very few people are questioning the authority of the government. It is established. They have procedures. They have locations and buildings and people that go there, and nobody's over here saying like, "Oh, I didn't vote for these people." You don't see that not once.
No.
So, legitimate. I think we agree. Super legitimate. Okay. So then let's talk effectiveness. This is where it starts to slip a little bit because we don't really have a clear mission statement from the Galactic Republic. It's like kind of a very vague sense of justice, equity, and freedom for all the people in the galaxy. Yay! And like we can start to see where that tapered off, and that's kind of the whole plot of the first movie is this giant bureaucratic body of legislators and or executives are completely incapable of responding quickly to emergency scenarios.
And I don't know that I can fully articulate the relationship of the Jedi to all of this, other than that they're kind of the military arm of this government, and they are likewise kind of mired in bureaucracy and ineffectiveness.
So the sense I get from the Jedi's relationship to the Galactic Republic is an equal but separate body. Because there's multiple times where, like, the government...
Yeah, they have their own council.
Yeah, like, the government kind of comes and says, hey, we need you to do this. But you always see the council of the Jedi going, no.
Not going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, they have veto powers over the assignments they get. It seems like they are an independent... Like, they're almost warrior monks that grew up next door to the government and be like, hey, we've got this military thing. Can you guys help us out? Like, call on your big brother to come settle a fight with a bully.
Well, that's what they did. They're like, well, we'll send a couple of Jedi to go talk to the Trade Federation and see if there's really a blockade going on.
And how effective... All right, let's talk about that. How effective is a galactic-wide government when, like, this entire planet is in peril that send 2 guys to go check it out?
Was the thing he was trying to accomplish there is to just show us how completely awesome the Jedi are? Like, that's enough.
Like, it's like, all right, we're going to send you into a situation where there's potentially, well, how many troops would it take to blockade a planet effectively, right? Like an entire fleet of battle cruiser size ships, all of the crew and starfighters and military hardware that goes with it. We're going to send you 2 to go fix it.
Yeah, you who are knighted or whatever, and you who are just an apprentice.
Yeah, you're right. They sent one guy and then his like student. And like some senior in high school.
Yeah. All right. So we've established all that. So the legitimacy, yes, it's legitimate. The effectiveness, I think we're in agreement that the Galactic Republic as depicted in the Star Wars prequels is not effective.
There's a debate on whether how effective it is. We only get to see this one instance of it not being very effective. I would argue that if it was effective at one point, it is definitely on the downward slope of not being effective anymore.
So if you lived on, I forget the name of the planet that the Senate actually was on.
Coruscant.
Coruscant. If you lived on Coruscant and you just were apathetic about Naboo, would you be like, yeah, everything's fine. The Senate's fine. My life is fine. I mean...
Yeah, if we're talking about the lifestyle now, it seems like there was this... Like the Star Wars, they don't say it explicitly, but if you listen for it in all of the Star Wars movies, they always talk about kind of the core planets and the rim. They're always talking about the outer rim, right? And it feels like the outer rim is like this Wild West. Like there's whole planets run by this gang of cartel, underground sleazy crime lords and
Tatooine.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. And all these other instances. There's slave traders. There is piracy. There is smuggling. Like. It seems like the further you get from the core of the government, the kind of more Wild West it kind of is. And so there's this disparity of haves and have-nots.
So not effective.
Well, not effective, but then now the lifestyle is going to be completely dependent on where you live in this society. Like if you're on Coruscant living on the surface and have like cool speeder cars and the high-rise apartments, it's probably feels pretty good. The Galactic Republic's doing their job, and yay, it's great to be a galactic citizen. If you're Anakin Skywalker, who is owned by a blue flappy guy fixing robots for your life without pay because you're a slave, probably feels pretty bad.
I don't know how our system encompasses this. Like, that just... is this a part of the effectiveness measurement or legitimacy? It's just a lifestyle measurement. Like, are there classes? What?
But it's kind of the government.
Like,
what
the
I'm talking
average citizen, or
well, not just average, but like if the government's job and their stated goal for the Galactic Republic is equity and justice and freedom for everybody, there are whole sectors of this galaxy where like the Republic doesn't even exist. Like the Jedi show up as like Republic credits. Those are no good out here. It's like they acknowledge that is the government, but their money's not
legitimate
good
here.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but then there's also, we can assume, parts of the galaxy, we'll include Alderaan in this, where the power and effectiveness of the Galactic Republic is recognized and the people are satisfied with it. And maybe Naboo right up until the Trade Federation gets there. Yeah,
they had their own planetary government, but it seemed like I didn't see much like bad stuff happening on Naboo. Like that whole city was very, very clean. The Gungans had a really nice like underwater apartment complex thing going. Like everybody seemed like everything was going good.
Okay, so lifestyle pretty good. Like, would you want to live in the Galactic Republic?
Would I want to live in the Star Wars universe? I think it depends entirely on. You know what? Hang on a second. I'm starting to double back because I'm thinking of. Oh no, I can't. I'm thinking of Luke Skywalker because he lived on Tatooine, kind of in a crap area, but he had the opportunity to go to school and like I'm going to become a starfighter pilot, and he had that opportunity as a literal moisture farmer from backwoods nowhere. So, but that wasn't the Republic, that was the Empire. So I can't include that in my thought processes. It's entirely not unlike our current system in the world. It's going to be a factor of where you roll the dice and where you end up getting born, right? So on the whole, the sum average, I think I would. I think the odds are better that I live on a planet where everything's going okay rather than I end up as a slave in the Outer Rim, right?
So this kind of leads to a question that's supposedly the fundamental question of the entire Star Wars universe is, what was the imbalance that was so unjust that needed to be corrected? What was the imbalance in the Force?
Oh, we're talking about two different things now.
All right,
because
I don't want to go down that if that's a rabbit hole. I'm just saying, if it was so unbalanced, I agree with you. I'd be fine living there in the Galactic Republic pre, the rise of the Empire.
And this is the key, is because the rise of the Galactic Empire, which we're going to talk about now, which starts the first time we see it is the last of the prequels and then going into the original trilogy, is that was not a political takeover.
They were kind of trying to resolve the problem with the Jedi. Whatever it is that had to do with the Force and people's access to that as a source of power in the galaxy, there was this supposed or prophesied imbalance that had occurred and that it needed to be corrected. Yeah. And so there was conflict occurring within the Jedi Order to achieve that balance in the Force.
Maybe not. Like, this was the rise of Palpatine as the Emperor, as a Sith Lord, right? This was not a political move. This was not the government is unfair, we should change it, or have this revolution and this uprising for equality and freedom. Yay! No. It was Palpatine, a legitimately, quantifiably evil Sith Lord on the opposite end of the spectrum of the Jedi, wanting power. Like, this was a coup. This was just a completely ousting of the old regime and a rising up of a dictatorship.
His lust for power, I was never convinced, or maybe they just spared us the exposition of his actual ambitions. Like, why did he want to have authority over anyone? The only thing I ever really got a sense of that was a legitimate reason why he wanted authority was just so that he could have superiority over other practitioners of the Force. Like, he didn't seem like, I want that planet because it has rare minerals, or I want that planet because it has, vast population of people who are good at engineering. It just felt like he wanted to be the king of the mountain on the Force.
Yeah. I don't know. People like this level of megalomania, where it's like he could easily have taken over a planet at any point, right? He probably could have easily taken over a small cluster of planets with very little effort, based on what we've seen in these movies. But he fought, like, you could see him at a bar one day, like having his drink of choice, going, you know what? I could take over the whole dang thing, and then to start putting all the pieces in place to make this happen. And who knows? Maybe it was a challenge to himself. Maybe he just wanted to be that guy. I don't. Who knows why these people are driven to do the point
where in our depictions of things, we don't question the fact that our antagonist wants to rule everything. Like, okay, this guy wants to rule everything. He's the bad guy.
Well, and this is the thing. In the original trilogy, like, there is the Emperor. He is evil, and he runs everything. And we're just like, yep, sounds good. And then we get the prequels, where they have to, they couldn't, like you're talking about, it's very muddy on why he wanted that power. And honestly, it would have just made it more complicated trying to justify it in the first place. It's a lot easier for us as the storyteller to accept, oh, bad guy. He's the bad guy. Stop the bad guy.
So in Phantom Menace, we kind of have this culmination of the government part of things, where they've set Jar Jar Binks up to conduct this, or Amidala, I can't remember who did it, this vote of no confidence in the existing chancellor, and then nominate the senator from Naboo to be the new chancellor, and that gives him his opportunity to rise to power. Meanwhile, he's amassing armies of clones and whatever to then turn this into a military coup, where he seizes what we can only assume is powers well beyond those bestowed upon the chancellor.
Well, and that was the thing that you're talking about with Jar Jar Binks, is the second or third of the prequel trilogy. He raised and then they approved the addition of emergency
powers,
executive powers to the chancellor, just because there's got to be one person getting
temporary,
things done.
so we can be more effective. So they're saying they weren't effective, and the lack of effectiveness was the source of the problem.
Right. Like, the situation is degenerating too fast. We can't debate everything. We got to have one guy that's got the ability to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And then he dissolved the Senate and never gave the powers back.
What? That could never happen.
What? I didn't. I thought I read this thoroughly. You didn't. So,
yeah. Okay. So as we're transitioning from the Galactic Republic to the Galactic Empire, that's exactly what happened, just like you described.
So how legitimate is that? Because, like, technically, what the movie is trying to tell us is that he worked within the system in order to gain all these powers and then become, like, he didn't, like, declare himself the emperor. Like, he kind of became the emperor and just changed his duty title at some point.
I'm declared that it's not legitimate, because it was based on a conflict that he created artificially to create the circumstances in the Senate. And then, even though he followed all those procedural steps that you described, it was based on deception. It wasn't. It's not legitimate.
That makes sense. Even though he worked within the system, he created the circumstances artificially to make that happen.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. I think it's easy to say Emperor Palpatine, the psychopath, killing everybody with his force tasing, is not a legitimate ruling body. But now, this is where I want to have the discussion. Let's talk about the effectiveness of the Empire. Because, Ben, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm on the side of the Empire is super effective.
I'm imagining you being an accountant on the Empire. You're like sitting at headquarters Empire on Coruscant. You're like in a cubicle somewhere doing their taxes.
Well, this is the thing. Like, so I've got so many little examples. Luke Skywalker was going to go to the Academy to become a starfighter pilot. He is a guy in the middle of nowhere. So we have a government where the planet is run by a crime cartel, but there is still an Imperial outpost somewhere, and they'll let anybody walk in and take the test. And if you're good enough, you make the cut. Boy, howdy, you're going to be in the empirical army. There is in the Solo movie, which we've never talked about that movie. Also terrible, but for a bunch of different reasons. But like you see the Empire in that movie constantly. There are stormtroopers in the background.
It was a noble effort.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with the movie. It's just there's no way you can tell that story in a way that's satisfactory for anybody. Yeah. Like, if that movie didn't have the name Han Solo, like if that was just some guy in the Star Wars universe, fantastic movie. The fact that that's supposed to be Han Solo makes me mad. But we see in that movie, the Empire is constantly in the background, and they're just doing their job. Like, you see stormtroopers, like, in a checkpoint, like Han Solo went to become a starfighter pilot through the Empirical training program again. Some guy who was, an orphan that was raised on the streets in some crime-ridden city, made the cut, got the training, joined the army, no problem. Like, it is... they're super effective at what they're supposed to do. And yeah, what they're supposed to...
Other than marksmanship training. They need to go back to the drawing board on that one.
Okay, so then... he's making a stormtrooper joke. They can't shoot for nothing. Like, we're talking about... What you're talking about is called plot armor. Like, the protagonist can't ever be hurt because he has plot
Unless
armor.
It's important for the plot.
Exactly,
that
yes.
He gets hurt.
That's right. So...
Okay, but you're right. You're right. They're effective. They've eliminated all of the checks and balances in the government, and as long as the Emperor is the one pulling the strings on this machine, people do his bidding, and there's not corruption or dissension in the ranks, then this Empire is going to get things done.
I mean, yeah, they're super evil and amoral, but I mean, they do what they do best. The one movie, where they stole the plans for the Death Star. What was that one called? Rogue Squad. Not New Hope. No.
Oh,
the new one where they actually stole the plans. Rogue One.
Yeah.
Also a terrible movie for a lot of weird reasons, but again, another depiction of where we get to see the Empire. Like, I did like that movie because stormtroopers were legitimately scary. Like, in every of the Star Wars movies.
Because they're effective. They showed up, they had the right equipment, they had training, they were organized, they had a plan.
There was at the beginning of that, I don't know, it was the beginning or the middle, it doesn't matter. There was a point in that movie where there's a desert city, and there was a capital ship, a Star Destroyer, parked over it. And their job was to keep law and order in this city. And boy, did they do it, and they did it well.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. So, Star Wars Republic was legitimate, but not effective. Now we have this Star Wars Empire. It is not legitimate, but it is effective.
Yes.
What's it like to live under it?
I'm gonna say I would probably, me being the straight-laced rules guy that I am, I'd be okay living under the Empire. Like,
so why did the rebellion happen? What were people supposed to be so dissatisfied with? It was the reason.
Never explained. Like, the people, Leia. Princess Leia was the daughter, or the adopted daughter of some ex-senator from the Republic, right? And so it feels like the whole Republic or the whole rebellion is built off of this. Well, this isn't right. This isn't what it's supposed to be. Like, all of these old hats,
they're just questioning the legitimacy of this new government.
Yeah, not necessarily the effectiveness, because the Empire was very effective at keeping them at bay for the longest freaking time.
You're right. They never really established what the Emperor and Darth Vader were doing that was actually problematic.
I will tell you right now, if you do nothing but watch that movie Rogue One, like, the rebels are legitimately the bad guys. Like, you don't see the Empire do anything overtly evil besides, like, a couple of guys at the highest levels. But, like, everybody else is just kind of doing their job. And there's a lot of stormtroopers that get killed. These stormtroopers have families, Ben. These are just people.
Do they?
Yeah. No. So the prequels, yes, they were clones, but this is established that, like, they transitioned away from the clones and they started recruiting, and, like, it turned into a normal thing. Like, the clones were unsustainable for that scale.
Got it. Okay, so yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, it might have been fine to live under the Empire. Like, I might have even joined Rebellion.
The rebels in Rogue One are straight up terrorists in every sense of the word. And, like, their government that they're going against is very amoral, and they've committed a handful of big atrocities. But the rank and file empirical troops and people getting stuff done, I mean, they're just doing their job. I would be okay living under the Empire, because we can't get away from this equity thing. Han Solo and Luke Skywalker both came from nothing and had the opportunity to go become much greater than they ever could have under the Republic.
So would I want to live under the Empire? I don't know. I guess I could join the Imperial Navy and get promoted to mid-level officer and just hope not to get force choked by Darth Vader.
As long as you're doing your job, it's fine. Like,
right.
The worst thing that could happen to you under the Empire is if you're born force sensitive. Like, that's probably the worst thing that could happen to you, because then the the minions will track you down. You get sucked into those like, oh, well, if you can do the Force, you're going to be a Sith. And here's how you get started.
Yeah, that didn't really happen, though, so I don't know if that's a possible outcome. It's like, well, if you can do the Force, then you're a threat and we're going to do away with you. And that was the source of...
So there's this whole expanding universe thing where like people that had Force powers didn't just stop being born because the Emperor took over. And they had the whole, like, we're going to track them down and we're going to train them. There is a video game series called The Force Unleashed where Darth Vader at some point had an apprentice named Star Killer, which is ridiculous. But there's just some Force-sensitive guy that they like, oh, he's going to be pretty powerful. Let's make him super evil.
Okay, so, I mean... Would the Empire have been killing people if the rebellion wasn't fighting back? I mean, this is a common dilemma in these kinds of films where, like, well, if the rebellion wasn't fighting, would Alderaan have not been blown up?
Because they did blow up Alderaan kind of to prove a point to Leia. But that's not the only time they weapons tested the Death Star. Like, in Rogue One, they weapon tested the Death Star to blow up the one city that I was talking about. Like,
okay, yeah, like, you're right.
Why are you guys blowing up cities? Like, so in my heart of hearts, Ben, I feel like that guy would have gotten court-martialed. Like, what are you thinking, blowing up random cities for no reason?
Okay, so but then what happens after the Emperor dies? I don't know. He's immortal. No, don't go down. Don't go down any of those. Okay, so we've got the Galactic Republic, Galactic Empire. The rebellion succeeds in their wish to dethrone the Empire, the Emperor, and now we've got the new trilogy. So what do we call the government in the new trilogy?
So I think it's the New Republic is what they're going with in this one. But the idea here is that they don't talk about it much, but they established a new republic. It is housed on a handful of core worlds and the remnants of the Empire, because shockingly, killing one person doesn't dismantle a galactic-wide form of government. There are still, like, there's a chain of command. There are still people in charge, right? And so they kind of degenerated, and the really militant, zealous, like the parts of it that didn't transition to the Republic, like were indoctrinated, went really zealous, and became the First Order. Is what I'm
realizing the transition from the Galactic Republic to the Galactic Empire wasn't simply dissolving the Senate and installing the Emperor, but it was also transitioning from a peaceful, elected, voluntary government to like dictatorship enforced by militaristic. So we transitioned from like this kind of peaceful democracy to a militaristic dictatorship.
Yes, but it makes a lot more sense in the context of there's this galactic-wide conflict that is happening, and these things just keep escalating to where they are. The death of the Emperor is a much harsher transition because, like, okay, everything that you knew before is gone, and we're going to start a new thing from scratch. That's a
It wasn't like they were just going to go, the Senate is back in session tomorrow.
Yeah, they can't. That's not a thing, right? Now it's been around so long. There's planets that forgot how to run proper elections or have been ruled by military governors for so long they don't even have a legitimate ruling class anymore. So who knows what kind of nightmare bureaucratic mess they had to clean up after that.
Mm-hmm. So the new order, I guess, and there's kind of a vacuum of power that exists now in the new trilogy where like it's not clear who, and so there's bids, although we don't really have another major competitor. There's the First Order led by Kylo Ren and a couple of shadowy figures that are trying to fill the void left by the departure of the Emperor. Yeah,
and we can complain about, like, this is one of my nitpicks, like, why is it there is this group of people fighting against the First Order and they're called the Resistance. I'm like, why? Isn't that just the government now? I thought the Republic was fighting against. Like, aren't they just the army?
Okay, so there's kind of a hand wave on like the new order or the First Order or whatever became the de facto ruling government, even though it's led by this shadowy figure of Snoke. They never really established there's any kind of like new dictator, nor is there a new elected representative republic.
There is a new elected representative republic, and those are the planets that the First Order blows up in The Force Awakens.
Huh.
So those handful of planets that get blown up towards the middle of the movie were the seats of the new republic. And so in the first movie, we had like this burgeoning, like democratic process coming online that then gets completely wiped out by what is now supposed to be a much smaller scale, like almost terrorist organization, zealot, like outcropping of the old empire.
So I'm a big believer that these things tend to be kind of like signs of the times. You know, the original Star Wars came back in the 70s, and we were kind of reaching the height of the Cold War and those kinds of things. And these are kind of reflections of the conflict between the U.S. and Russia and those kinds of things. And I get kind of the transition in the, you know, mid-2000s to more of like a terrorism kind of bent. But there was so much power creep happening in the weapons technology of the whoever was the head dictator candidate that now we're just randomly blowing up planets willy-nilly from a single place in the galaxy. Like, it just was out of control.
Well, I mean, that's a heck of a weapon that you had to convert an entire planet into it, and it takes the power of a star to fire it one time, so that's a lot of investment for one shot. Like, they very much hand-waved, and just everything had to be bigger, better than the first ones.
Yeah, that was a problem.
So
they should have dialed it back.
That's a storytelling problem. That is not a government problem. So
Okay.
are we talking about we know almost nothing about the new republic that is formed. So let's talk about the First Order.
I don't know. I don't know if they're legitimate or not.
Oh, they're complete.
These are our three questions. Are they legitimate? Are they effective? And what's the lifestyle?
So from my perspective, it is just the most distilled and zealous faction and the piece of the old empire that stuck together and became the First Order. So
Okay.
I think they inherit the sins of their fathers in this one, and they are completely illegitimate.
All right. I concur. Are they effective?
Are they effective in the sense that I'm going to say they are pretty effective in their stated goals, because their stated goals was to topple the current regime and come back to power. And this little splinter group converted an entire planet into some unheard of like technological marvel and like destroyed 5 planets basically out of nowhere with no warning. So that's pretty effective if you're talking about our job is to kill the current republic, and they did it.
I'm going to non-concur on this one because in the original trilogy, it felt like the rebellion was this legitimate, plucky, kind of one-off small thing. But under the First Order, it felt like the rebellion was everywhere. Like that just no one agreed that there was any legitimacy, and it was just what's going to be our opportunity to overcome these guys. I don't know. Then there was also an element of that the middle film where they had that the Navy was being pursued and their light speed was broken or whatever. I can't even remember.
That movie was so bad for so many reasons. Like, yeah, if you want to talk, all right, let's talk about the effectiveness. Like, oh, we're gonna chase down that ship and kill everybody on it. Like, even then, like, they were kind of effective because they trapped them on a planet. They had a whole plan to counter their cleverness that they were going to escape onto. And at the end of that movie, if you remember, at the end of the second movie, the entire resistance fit onto...
like a dozen people?
Yeah, it fit onto the Millennium Falcon. The whole resistance. Like, that's pretty effective. That's way more effective than the Empire was in rooting out the rebellion.
Okay. All right, so they inherited the non-legitimate status, but they retained their effectiveness. It's simply by virtue of their escalating weapons technology.
Yep. And so lifestyle under the First Order.
I mean, they never dealt with the fact that what happens to the planet they're on once they extinguish the sun that it's orbiting.
Presumably they're going to somehow push it to another star? Like, who knows how that's going to work?
Would I want to live there? I'm going to say no on this one.
There's a whole story arc about how Finn was taken as a small child and brainwashed and practically tortured into being this killing machine that is a stormtrooper. So no, I don't think I want to live under these crazy people.
So if it's the power of the First Order, it's kind of corrupt or dangerous, and at any moment you could be, suspected of being part of the resistance, and then you're in danger of a Kylo Ren style, purge where he shows up and starts hacking away with his lightsaber and shooting people. Yeah, it was horrific. All around bad lifestyle.
When Darth Vader force choked guys from across the galaxy somehow through a radio wave, like, at least he had a good reason. Like, you have failed me for the last time. Like, if you just accidentally say the wrong words to Kylo Ren, respectfully, not even mouthing off, you might get sliced in half.
Right, yeah. Darth Vader, he was like doing business metrics. You know, he had his MBA, and he was like, no, you failed me for the last time.
Yeah, the costs outweigh the benefits here. You gotta die. Kylo Ren is just, I'm angry, and I'm going to take it out on everything within the reach of this lightsaber.
All right. So, no. We're going to say no on the First Order.
Yeah, I don't want to live under the First Order. It's like the most... it's like the Empire with the craziness dialed up to 11. I don't want to live under that.
So, from a perspective of evaluating the government in Star Wars universe, what... I don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to do a reboot or whatever, you know? But what happens now? The Emperor came back. They defeated him again. Now what? There's this giant vacuum of power in the galaxy.
Yeah, no, because they completely wiped out the other government. Like, it falls back to individual planets, right? Like, we're going to see a regression in the technology, in the culture, in the economies. Like, that last movie that we saw is the start of a dark age for the galaxy.
And I like that you use that term because there is very sufficient premise for this. You know, like after the fall of the Roman Empire, after the fall of the Persian Empire, after the fall of China, you know, there was this time where there was this golden age where empires rose, and then for whatever reason they fell, and then there was this vacuum of power, and everyone became tribal. And yep. I think that's what you're describing. Yeah,
it shatters. People stop working together, which reduces the overall utility. Everybody has to focus on themselves. Technological progress, all the things that civilization comes to a grinding halt and sometimes regresses. Yeah. No, this is going to be a bad time for the Empire.
All right, I'm going to ask this completely rhetorically, and I don't want to go down the answer, but like, could that happen in our world? All right.
So, no answer whatsoever?
No, don't answer that.
Okay, the answer is yes, but we'll move on.
Okay, so I think that's it for Star Wars.
We should skip over and go to a fantasy universe now. What do you think?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk Lord of the Rings, which is going to be complicated because, like, if we want to talk about Tolkien, we can't talk about Tolkien without acknowledging the fact that man wrote 400 pages about how green the leaves were on the trees. So
yeah, and at my time when I was at my peak of fantasy reading, I still could not penetrate the density that was Tolkien. Like, he was a brilliant scholar, and he undertook his writing of the fantasy of Middle Earth with such a methodical way that he invented new languages. He, you know, set up cultures and governments and wrote all this stuff, and then as all of that is his basis, then he wrote the story on top of that, where he just kind of drawing upon it without actually saying all of it. And so we have, you know, elves and dwarves and man and hobbits and orcs and trolls and leaders and history and past and future and all of this, and I don't even know where to start. Well,
so let's boil it down. What Tolkien did, and this was like kind of unique in fantasy, is he created what we consider base fantasy. And the way that he did that is he created the entire world before he told a single story in it. And people that aren't familiar with Tolkien may not be aware that he didn't just write the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but he also wrote this book called the Silmarillion. I cannot pronounce it to this day. But he wrote another book that all this book is kind of like an encyclopedia for this fake universe that he created.
And I can't even imagine all the notes and diagrams and stuff he had.
It's like he created multiple religions. Like you said, he created multiple languages from scratch. Like, it is...
Yeah, I think his profession of experience was linguistics. I think he was a linguistics professor.
Like you said, density. Density is the perfect word for this because, like I said, he created this entire universe and then picked one point in time in it to tell a story. And that's where we get the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So what we can do is we can just take the Lord of the Rings trilogy and look at the handful of governments that we're aware of within that trilogy and then kind of break them down quickly. If, you know, we don't have a great understanding of all of them, but I think we have enough.
Right. Unlike Star Wars, where it's kind of homogenous, we're just referring to the government of the entire galaxy. On Middle Earth, we have regional governments that are competing.
Yes. And so let's start with... you broke this down very well, and I want to stick with this one. The two big groups are the free peoples and the enslaved peoples.
Sure.
With the free peoples being kind of the protagonists that we see in the movie, all the good guys, you know.
Right. When you have the council in the elf city, all the people sitting around the table represent the free peoples.
Right. And so the elves, the dwarves, the men, hobbits are in there somewhere, and then Ents apparently have their own system.
Yeah, they weren't really represented in that council, but yeah, the Ents.
By far the coolest characters in all the movies, but it's fine. We'll move on from the Ents. So, free people government. Seems like the elves, like the government that we see is they have a ruling council, and it's headed by one person. Like each little section or sub-tribe of elves has one guy that's kind of in charge. And if they need to make big, high-level decisions, they get those three people together, and that's kind of like the ruling council of the elves.
Yeah. And the free peoples, I think, at the point we join the story, the kind of the de facto situation is that they're at peace. Maybe they don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, but they just have their agreements and separation of boundaries and whatever, and they all go about things in their own way.
Yeah, and elves don't die naturally, like they live for thousands of years or whatever. So it would be super easy to completely blow off every kind of petty trade conflict that ever happened. Like, whatever, this is going to happen for like a decade, and then it's going to be gone, so why should I even bother with it?
Right. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing with the Ents. Just because their perception of time is so different, it just makes them so that they can't even really interact with another race in a way that makes sense to either one.
Right. And so let's talk about just, if we're going to look at just the Elven Society, I mean, we have nothing that points at it being illegitimate. It seems like the people that are in charge are generally accepted, and they are the wisest or whatever, and people take them at face value and like, yep, this is the guy. He's in charge.
I'm going to expose my ignorance of this universe, but did the elves have a geographic area that they are rulers of?
They have areas like the different,
or are they like a city state?
It kind of basically is. The elves have their own like hidden off sections of the world. And they're so magically powerful that unless they really want you to stumble into their territory, you won't. Like, you'll just accidentally wander around it without even knowing that it happened.
Got it. All right. So he just kind of sidesteps the geography problem of this.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he also does the same with, like, the dwarves. It's like they don't naturally want to inhabit the same territory. So even though they're free peoples and there could potentially be conflict amongst them, there just isn't. Because the dwarves live underground, and the elves, you can't find them, and the hobbits are just keep to themselves. And
now the dwarves are an interesting point because, like, we keep hearing like Gimli talking constantly about like these great dwarven kingdoms that live underground. They have these immense cities, and we see one in one of the movies. But the only time we see these underground dwarven empires, which are huge and amazing, and probably would have been great to live under, they're completely wiped out either by goblins,
extinct.
Trolls, or dragons, or whatever. Like, so we never.
The golden age of dwarves is over in the period we're examining.
Yeah, we've never seen a functioning dwarven society in the Lord of the Rings books.
Okay. So I found a resource for evaluating these. I'll put it in the show notes and on the Facebook. That kind of looks at these on an XY coordinate plane like we use sometimes, with the x-axis being good versus evil and the y-axis being simple versus being complexity. Okay. Simple versus sophisticated. So if you think of that, like good and simple is Hobbiton. The hobbits, they're
we don't really see a hobbit government. We see like a hobbit town of everybody kind of getting along, kind of the neighborly thing. Like if you mess with your neighbor, like they're gonna put up the fisticuffs and then probably drink it off at the tap room. But like, they just kind of easy going.
Right. And then you've got Gondor, where things are more sophisticated, but they're still pretty good. They have a more coherent military for defending their territory and understanding of succession of power and those kinds of things.
Yeah, you're talking about the different kingdoms of men, and those are pretty traditional monarchies from what we see. Like to varying degrees of complexity, like you're talking about Gondor being like very complex and hardcore versus the horse lords being a little more not nomadic. Nomadic's the wrong word, but kind of lower end. Like we see like wooden palisades kind of stuff. They have a fort that they fall back to in I think it's Deep Helm. I'm going to mess up a lot of the proper pronouns in this one. But like the human kingdoms are pretty traditional, what you would think of as fantasy monarchies.
And then you have the enslaved peoples, and they're, I don't know how to talk about their sophistication, but definitely they're on the evil side of things. So you got Mordor, where even though we never really hear Sauron's plans and stuff, we assume they're intricate. They're building armies, they're sending out spies, all these kinds of very sophisticated scheming things to try to get power over, enslave all of the races.
There is a deity in the Lord of the Rings universe, and he created lesser angels to go out and do his bidding, one of those being Sauron. Like, there is a whole thing that he describes in the backstory of this. Sauron is like a high-level like angel that fell from grace and decided, nope, I want all of this, just to prove his dad wrong. Like, I'm going to show you. So we don't really have a good idea of how he's going to accomplish that ridiculous supernatural goal. But one of the ways that he does that is he starts taking over everybody that he can through mind control, which is what the rings did. The rings were a focus of his power in order to take over specific people. He tried to give it to the elves. It didn't work. He tried to give it to the dwarves. Dwarves aren't really real people. They're like clockwork things that didn't quite take to mind control. But men, oh boy, did men really fall for these rings mind control things. And that's where we get the ring wraiths, like those people walking around, the ghosty things that stabbed Frodo in the first movie. Those are the ancient kings of men that fell to the mind control of Sauron.
So I'm thinking about our three questions now: the legitimacy, effectiveness, and lifestyle. And we, it's such a vast kingdom with so many different situations. It's kind of hard to answer. Do we just pick one?
So I'm going to say, like, in general, it seems like the free people's governments, nobody's disputing that. It seems like they're all legitimate. Like, the kings are in charge, and there's a little bit of turmoil with Aragorn and Gondor being the proper king. Like, there's a guy, like, the steward of Gondor didn't want to give up the power, but he jumped off a cliff, and we don't have to worry about him anyway, and everything worked out great in the end. So
in general, they're legitimate. I'll agree with that.
In general, they are legitimate, yes.
Okay, now effectiveness, I'm going to say no. I think it's the whole source of conflict.
You're right. The source of conflict in these books is that the free people's effectiveness is not great, but the effectiveness of the enslaved people is super high.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the free peoples can't agree that there's a problem. They don't understand the threat, and meanwhile it's going to creep up on them and overtake them.
Oh, and it's clear. Like, you can see at the end of the third movie, like, the free peoples were completely screwed if the short guy hadn't thrown the piece of jewelry into the lava at that exact moment.
Right.
Which is a ridiculous premise for a climax of a book, but we'll skip over that.
But also great high fantasy.
Great high fantasy, I agree with that.
Okay, lifestyle.
Ooh, I think it's bad all over, man.
I don't know, if you're a hobbit, maybe it's okay, but eventually the ringwraiths and the orcs are going to show up and do what? What do they want? Corn? Potatoes? Potatoes.
Potatoes.
They want second breakfast.
I agree with you. I think this is an easy kill. If you're a hobbit, man, life is good. Everybody else, it kind of sucks.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know what? There's an argument for elves. Elves might be a decent life if you could not get bored over thousands of years doing nothing.
I mean, elves really have to grapple with the dilemma of, do we care about this?
Yeah.
Like, will this just blow over and we don't need to engage? The Ents kind of grapple with it as well. Like, well, why should we care about this?
Yeah, but the Ents seemed like Treebeard. He seemed like he had a great life. He's talking about this family of mice that he knew on this other side of the forest. And then he turns on and is like, oh, wait, this half of the forest is burning. Okay, I guess I'm going to get involved. He seemed like he had a pretty good life until all the enslaved people screwed it up. So, all right, elves, Ents, and hobbits, good. Everybody else, no thanks.
Okay. All right. I think that does it for Lord of the Rings.
Man, we talked Star Wars to death, and I think we killed Lord of the Rings in like 15 minutes. Like,
but maybe that shows the brilliance of J.R.R. Tolkien in kind of his planning all of this out and creating all of the lore before he wrote the story.
That's super meta. The only reason we're discussing Star Wars for so long is because the movies are so all over the place and so bad.
Yeah. If somebody actually bothered to sit down and like figure out all the cultures and peoples and power struggles and stuff and then do the Star Wars story, maybe it would be a bit more fleshed out.
Okay. So now I have to ask you a very important question, Ben. How into Star Trek are you?
All right, let's give it a 10-point scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
10 is like you speak Klingon.
Ooh, okay. One
and
being...
one is like you can't answer the question, do you like Kirk or do you like Picard?
Yeah, like you have no context in that. I get, okay. So 1 to 10, Star Trek, go.
7.
I'm going to put myself at an 8.
Okay. And I think you're probably above me. Like, have I consumed all of the serials, like Star Trek Enterprise, Deep Space Nine? I have not. I haven't watched all of the original. I've watched all the films multiple times, including the reboot. And I've watched most of Next Generation, some of the original TV series, and 1 or 2 episodes of the other spin-off serials.
I'll tell you what, like the original series is groundbreaking and innovating for its time, but looking back, man, it's hard to watch.
Oh, yeah. Well, and even the Next Generation, about every 4th episode is just so cringy I can barely stomach it.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah. I can't disagree with that. But the government that we're talking about, that pervades, thankfully, through the movies, through the different series, like all the different versions of Star Trek that exist, there is the one consistent governing body that we are going to talk about, and that is the United Federation of Planets.
So I think Gene Roddenberry was a lot more cut from the fabric of J.R.R. Tolkien in this respect. Like, he had an ideal, he planned out the lore beforehand of what he wanted his society to look and be like.
And it's interesting because you see some of the interviews and things with him, and the time that he came up with this whole concept was like, kind of like in the middle of the Cold War, coming out of Vietnam, things aren't looking great. Like everything's on the down and everything's looking bad. And he came out with this bright, cheery, shiny, new utopia version of what the future could be.
And yet it's still reflecting humanity. The Klingons were the Soviets, and the Federation were the free peoples.
In Next Generation, that kind of shifted to the Romulans, but we're not going to get into the specifics.
But again, they reflect the times.
Yeah, and it adapts and changes, and like the political landscape moves, and that's what's interesting about the shows and the movies is that it feels like it could really happen.
Okay, so I want you to show your chops as an 8 on our scale of how much of a Trekkie are you. Well, maybe we should both downgrade by 1. I'm a 6 and you're a 7. But because have you ever dressed in a Star Trek costume?
Ooh, I have.
Have you ever been to a convention?
No, I have not been to a convention. I have not dressed in the costume. But but those in my mind are like a 9. Like if you're going out of your comfort zone.
So teach me about the United Federation of Planets. What are the aspects of it as a government?
So as a government, it is, like the best way to describe it, it is the most technologically enlightened planets. If you meet this threshold for entry, then you get invited to this Federation of Planets, and you have.
And if you don't, we're not even going to interfere with your society and pretend you don't exist.
Yes, exactly. We're going to let you evolve on your own, and it's like almost being like once this threshold is warp technology. Once your society,
I love that idea.
Yeah, once you are capable of traveling faster than light, now you are almost like they acknowledge like now you've become part of a larger community, a larger universe. We're not going to interfere with your own natural development because that's kind of it. Like the way that the Star Trek universe portrays it is like, you're your own worst enemies. You're stuck with yourself on your own planet. Can you overcome your tribalism? Can you overcome your petty differences? Can you overcome like the challenges of forming a functional society that values technology and enlightenment and equity over everything else? And then make this huge technological leap of being capable of traveling to other planets realistically. We're not talking about the generation ships. That's not
I love it.
Not an effective thing. And then if you meet all of these criteria, you are welcomed into this Federation of Planets. And oh, by the way, there are some standards of criteria that we need you to adhere to. And it's stuff like basic human rights and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so we mostly experience this from the human perspective. Our fearless adventurers that have gone to Starfleet Academy, who are on the military side of this United Federation of Planets, but their mission is to boldly go and
Well, and this
scientific and whatever.
And Star Trek is set in a universe where humanity has developed replicator technology. You have a box that you plug into the wall that uses electricity and creates whatever you want. Okay? So we have completely transcended the whole idea of like capitalism or having a job. Like you do not have to have a job in the Star Trek universe because we have replicators. You can have whatever you want. There is no currency and no money in the Star Wars universe, or Star Trek universe, because everybody just has whatever they want. What they don't show is this planet full of just slackers, of people that just sit around and do nothing. And
right, we're going to focus on the ambitious people here.
Right, and that's the thing, because in a world where like everything is already provided to you, the idea is that you can focus on the things that you truly love and really just hone and refine it. And so only the truly driven, the truly brilliant, like that's why every Star Trek episode has like just these crazy, talented and ambitious and driven people doing these things, because those are the only people that get sent to space. Like it is the best of the best of the best that gets to do this.
Yeah. J.J. Abrams kind of just tried to explore this a little bit in the reboot series, and I'm not one of the detractors from the reboots. It has its own merits. I don't think it's just a blot on the Star Trek universe.
I am on the opposite end of that spectrum. J.J. Abrams totally screwed up Star Trek. He had no idea what Star Trek was when he made that movie, and it makes me mad.
Yeah. But I like the idea that we went back to just Iowa, USA, and it's just people living on Earth that looks kind of like the one we're on, but this thing's still happening in the stars. We're now in contact with other races and other planets and stuff like that. But he's still just like growing up in a farmhouse, and his stepdad's trying to make him do his chores. But the fact that he's smart and driven and fearless makes him the kind of person that can go out and boldly go where no one has gone before.
So that argument doesn't land very hard with me, because I'm a hardcore Picard over Kirk person. Like if you watch these shows, the whole driving principle of the United Federation of Planets is the Prime Directive. And that is, we don't interfere with developing societies. Like our whole deal is we're like, even the people we talk to, we are advisors. We are not a direct authority figure, right? We are trying to help you become better. Kirk is a freaking pirate. He's out in the stars doing whatever he wants.
No respect for the
Prime
Directive.
Swashbuckling and just sleeping with whatever alien lass ends up in his quarters that day. Like, it's ridiculous. The other end of the spectrum, we got Picard, who is constantly struggling with this is morally objectionable and terrible, and we should do something, but the Prime Directive says I can't do anything about it. And he's always struggling with that conflict of, these are the ideals that I uphold, and these are like the pure moral values of the situation.
Do you think, so to get to our three questions, do you think there's any question of the legitimacy of the United Federation of Planets?
This is a tricky one, because this is the deal. Like everybody will acknowledge, like, the Federation is great. There's a handful of people that don't, like the Romulan Empire doesn't buy into it. The Klingons don't buy into it, but they're like at peace and they're separate governing bodies. But like, think of it from the perspective of a planet, of a society that's developing this technology. You develop warp, and then somebody comes down and is like, you did it. Congratulations, you guys rock. You get to be a part of this government. Well, hang on. Who says you guys are in charge?
Well, okay, you bring up a fact that there's kind of this lurking military side of this. That, they're a peaceful organization, and there's this bar of entry, and that everyone kind of belongs, and they just help each other along. But there's also a conflict. There's a conflict with the Klingons, and then a conflict with the Romulans, and there's not necessarily a mutually agreed truce and a neutral zone, and those are enforced by military force.
Yes.
The Starfleet is ships that are armed with very dangerous weapons, and that will that have defined areas of space you can't go into and places you can't go, and and will enforce it with lethal force. Yes.
So this is where so they are morally like objectively it seems like the Federation is a good government. They're trying to do the right things, but the legitimacy is always going to be in question for me, because like, who put you guys in charge? Like you got the space race first, so that means you get to set the bar for everybody else.
Yeah. Who did set it first? Was it the Klingons?
No, it was. I think it was. Oh man, this is.
It was the Ferengi. Say it was the Ferengi.
It was the Ferengi. No, this is where I get downgraded because it's. It was. I think it was Spock's race. At least they introduced us to it. Like the.
Sorry. The Vulcans. That's what I meant. I said Klingons, but I meant Vulcans.
You said Ferengi, which is also an excellent Deep Space Nine reference.
Yeah, I'm also revealing.
Okay, I'm going to
go. Got downgraded as well.
Go ahead and downgrade me to that 7 because I forgot Vulcan in the heat of the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So, but they, within the context of the fact that this thing exists, it enforces itself. And there was lots of conflicts where Picard or Kirk or whatever is arguing with a Klingon or a Romulan over the screen, and he says, "What are you doing in the neutral zone?" They say, "We don't recognize your authority to tell us where we can and can't go."
Which, I mean, from their perspective, is totally legitimate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's very similar to conflicts among men.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a legitimacy question is like, I'm going to say, I don't know. I'm in the middle somewhere. Like, I don't know. It depends on your perspective.
Well, I think the United Federation of Planets is very similar to NATO. In that they all have their own autonomous governments, and then they kind of had this military alliance to help enforce the general peace, and there are external antagonists that they exist to oppose that don't recognize their legitimacy.
Okay. So does that make them legitimate?
Yes. I think from the perspective of the member nations, yes, the United Federation of Planets is legitimate.
Okay. I'll give you that. Now let's talk about our other criteria, which is effectiveness. Is the United Federation of Planets, is that effective government in its stated role of the prime directive, non-interference?
So in a universe like the Star Trek universe, where you kind of have this canon that tends to be, well, I don't know. The TV series existed first, and they started creating the films. And the films they reserve for the biggest jumps in transforming the environment. Like the biggest changes of people dying and major shifts happening. Kirk finally accepting Klingons, or, the Borg trying to assimilate Earth, or those kinds of things. Those all happen in the films. And in the films, you kind of see problems with the effectiveness of the United Federation of Planets. They only sent one ship when they should have sent 100, or there's corruption inside, and that there was an alliance between the Klingons and the Federation, and that there was, I don't know.
No, you see,
I'm going to say not as effective as you probably want to think they are.
From the film's perspective, you're right. It feels very non-effective, but that is because the films have to have a 3-act structure in the 2 hours that the film is on, and that's going to be some kind of military conflict. If you're looking at the TV series, a lot of the situations are much more interpersonal, or much more like, oh, we're on this exploration. Like this whole episode is about the fact that we are going to survey this star today. And so most of what they do is non-military in nature. It's the nature of the movie that has to have some kind of military conflict. So if we go with the prime directive, the non-interference of developing species, I think it's incredibly effective because they do everything they can to stand off. Yes, it's broken sometimes by individuals. I'm looking at you, Kirk. Stay on your freaking ship. But for the most part, they do their job in staying back, letting a society develop on its own, and then as easily and as gently as possible introducing them to this much larger universe that they are a part of. And yes, they are not effective at the military aspect because they're primarily a non-military force.
Okay. So you're saying from the perspective of just scientific exploration and, potentially intervening if necessary, but otherwise not interfering with peoples and worlds, they're relatively effective. They do the best they can to just kind of stay out of the way. So would you want to live in this government? Yeah. It's like it's almost the definition of what we consider a human utopia, where we have solved all energy crises, we have solved all resource arguments, we have everything that we want or need. If you want to be a fat, lazy bastard, that's fine. We have the medical technology to keep you alive for 150 years. If you want to be a driving go-getter and discover your true passion in life, every person on Earth has the opportunity to really discover what drives them and to just hone it to superhuman levels. Yeah, this is a world I want to live in. I love how passionate you got about this just now. So listeners, we've found Josh's happy place. Would you be on a holodeck, or would you be actually out roaming the galaxy?
Oh, no, there's no chance I'd be out roaming the galaxy. No chance whatsoever. It wouldn't be in a holodeck either, though. I would be the guy sitting there watching TV for a while, and I turn off and I go, computer, replicator, make me a lock-picking set. I'm going to get really good at this for no reason.
So your life just becomes Groundhog Day. Today I'm going to learn how to carve ice.
Well, and let's boil it down. If the most valuable resource that you have in your life is time, and so you want to spend that time doing the things that make you happy, and happiness is a moving target. So whatever grabs my interest at the time, that's what I'm going to go with. And as it was City Slickers, this movie that I'm going to reference, it's like, if you have to sit down and choose the cereal that you're going to eat for the rest of your life, how are you going to be able to pick if you haven't had the sampler platter?
How have you watched Star Trek Picard?
Ooh, is that the new one on Netflix?
No, it's on CBS All Access.
Oh, yes, the new Star Trek. No, yeah. I actually have not seen that.
I only watched the pilot. And one of the things I could tell they're already wanting to grapple with is they're trying to introduce corruption and scheming amongst politicians in the United Federation of Planets and that kind of thing, to just make it, I don't know, more like our current government instead of like this Gene Roddenberry utopia, now that he's not, now he's dead, not calling the shots anymore. But there's also grappling with what you were talking about, the fact that Picard is an old man. He doesn't have the energy and the drive to be out roaming the galaxy anymore. He's kind of retired, and whatever that looks like. It looks like a Tuscan villa is what it looks like.
He always talked about his vineyard that he was going to have, his family vineyard. Yeah. But I mean, you think about it, like that was the peak. Like he was the commander of the flagship of the premier government in the galaxy, doing like all these things that had groundbreaking impacts on the development of every living thing everywhere. And now I just got to retire to my vineyard in Tuscany.
Yeah. That
would be super boring.
Well, what is the point of growing grapes if you can just replicate any vintage of wine? And it's just, it means that work has some kind of inherent quality irrelevant of the product.
Yeah, exactly. It is, you have to develop or derive utility from the labor to get to the end thing. And there's a lot of people that would say that. There's a ton of movies where like the point is just taking the satisfaction from a hard day's work.
All right. Well, okay. 2 thumbs up for the United Federation of Planets. Good job, Gene Roddenberry. We want to live in your universe.
It's glorious. All right. So we saved the last one that we have on our list is the last fantasy one was Harry Potter. And we're already kind of running a little long in the episode, but I think that's okay because you and I both agree that we don't know a whole lot about...
We're not going to have a lot to say here, yeah.
It's honestly, I feel like this is more just like we're going to get it so wrong. Maybe it'll stir up our listeners to like come and comment at us about how wrong we got it.
Definitely. When we were in Utah last summer, my wife and my sister-in-law signed into, in the middle of the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the local community was trying to find a way to continue on with like their social activities, and they were holding this online quiz of Harry Potter where like people signed in and answered questions on like a quiz app. And my sister-in-law and my wife like destroyed this thing.
Okay, well, Ben's sister-in-law and Ben's wife, if you're listening now, get ready to start writing down everything we get wrong.
Yeah. Okay, so the Harry Potter universe. Here's something I didn't realize that people didn't know, or we even found out. When we moved to England and my children joined British schools and started going to British schools, there were houses and prefects and head boys, and everything I thought was just something fantastical that J.K. Rowling made up for her magical universe was just a regular British kid's childhood.
Yeah, no, that's just how British boarding schools work.
Right, but people didn't know that. People didn't, not just British boarding schools, British public schools where you live at home, but yes.
Yeah, but yeah, Americans by and far had no idea that that's how school was organized overseas.
It's not some completely unique thing. It's just regular everyday life with the twist of adding magic.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, so you're getting your school supplies. Yeah, you're getting a wand and a cauldron and robes, but it's very similar to a British kid just getting, getting a uniform and a blazer and a tie and whatever.
And glue sticks and glitter and construction paper and the scissors that don't cut. And, all the stupid things that little kids need.
Exactly. So that fact being established, that she just took what she knew and gave it a slight magical twist, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that's exactly what she did with the government. The government of the Ministry of Magic is just kind of like British Parliament, but with a slight magical twist.
So we see very little of it in the films. Most of what we see comes in the later films, and it's just these snippets, because the conflict exists kind of outside of the government, or by the end we assume that the government has been infiltrated and corrupted by minions or whatever. But so what I'm going to talk about, again, I know very little about the actual ministry itself, but what I do know is how ridiculously stupid it is that it exists at all. So, my biggest problem with this whole thing is we have the existence of Ron Weasley's dad. And it's like, oh, my dad works for the Ministry of Magic for Muggle affairs, and his job is to research the stuff that Muggles do. And I'm sorry, are you not an integrated society? Like, you live on this. I get that the magic part is hidden from the normal Muggle people, but how?
Right.
But like, how do you not know what cars are? How do you not have cell phones? How do you not know what computers are? Like, I get that.
Why does this require research?
I get that you have magic, but listen. We have solved the messaging over a distance problem. Like, you need to stop capturing and magically training owls and enchanting parchment. Like, you can type an email and it will get to your son right this second. Like, there are some things that Muggles just do better.
I'm going to call back to our old friend Brandon Sanderson here. I watched a lecture series that he gave to his freshman creative writing course. I highly recommend it. It's 13 lectures. They're an hour or so each. It's all up on YouTube, on his YouTube channel. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But one of them, he kind of takes this on where he's talking about when you're in a fantasy universe, you need to have internal consistency and external consistency. I can't remember if those are the exact terms he used, but he gave J.K. Rowling as a bad example about how within each of the 7 books, she sets up rules, and she's relatively consistent with those rules. But the problem is she didn't start out planning all this from the beginning. So there's things that maybe she sets up and uses within one of the books that don't translate very well because they exist in the other ones. Like, for instance, I can't remember which book it was where Hermione has a time turner, and she's able to travel through time. Like, that only occurs within that book, and then in all the other books they pretend like it doesn't exist because it would solve so many problems.
No, it would solve all problems everywhere for all time by definition.
Right, and that's just one example, but it's kind of consistent with her writing style in that within an individual book she has the plot arc and the character development and all the things she's trying to accomplish, and she'll come up with something having to do with the government that facilitates the plot point she's trying to make, but she didn't necessarily think through how this is going to interact through all of the universe, which
makes perfect sense. Like, she didn't know she was going to get famous and write all these books, so she didn't plan all out in advance. But good for her. These great things happen to her. That's fine. Let us not forget that the Ministry of Magic is garbage. And, like, she clearly didn't spend enough time talking about the government of the ruling body of the magical peoples.
I can sense, she was starting to gain momentum because, this all happened. It wasn't like after she'd written all the books, then someone discovered them and they got famous. It was like right about in the middle, she started really gain momentum. And there was this, I don't know if you remember this, but just this absolute clamor for her next book and parties and people sleeping out and libraries, and everyone was excited about this. And as people were enchanted by this universe, there was this appetite, this never-ending appetite for the universe to kind of increase in depth. And so just her throwing out just a throwaway, like referring to the Department of Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, it sparks people's imaginations. Well, there's now two films and probably a third going to be coming about just that. Yeah, and that was a throwaway in one of the books.
A throwaway line becomes 3 movies because, man, we can't milk this thing for enough money.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring it back to our criteria. Let's talk about the legitimacy of the Ministry of Magic. And right now, huge fail. because the last book, the big bad guy is discovered and the whole government apparently is on his side. Like, how did that happen?
It was very much like Captain America Winter Soldier style, just Hydra revealed themselves as being everywhere.
Yeah. Everybody's like, haha, we've all been working for the bad guy this whole time. I think that makes your government not legitimate when half of the people in it are evil. Not bad guys, not have a different perspective. Evil. The guy has a snake face. It's evil.
Okay, so... but again, we're kind of deciding whether or not to zoom in or out in making this, because like for the most part, over the course of the 7 books, the Ministry of Magic seems to function. It replicates day-to-day life. She wanted it to be like Parliament. Yeah, you don't always agree with Parliament, what they're doing, but for the most part, they maintain law and order.
Is that a legitimacy thing, or is that an effectiveness thing?
Well, but again, that's another part of the universe that our main protagonists are children, so they're not concerned about who the prime minister is. They're concerned about who the headmaster is. And that's mostly what we focus on. They're just hinting at these other
There's
things.
a couple of times where they get in trouble with the Ministry of Magic. Like they flew that freaking car in the middle of downtown London.
Or Harry gets busted for using magic on his auntie or whatever it was.
Right, yeah. So he broke the law about, Muggles can't be allowed to know what magic is. So, but instead of, I don't know, it seems so reactive. It's like, oh, there was a flying car. How are we going to cover this up? Like, that seems like a terrible way to run a government.
Yeah, and there's also kind of a lot of hinting to the existence of prisons, and that there's some kind of lawmaking body that creates and enforces laws, and then if you break the laws, you're sent to the prison, and those kinds of things. But again, it's all ancillary. It's not primary.
I'm not going to lie to you, Ben. Like, one of the most fascinating concepts in all of the Harry Potter universe, to me personally, was that body of law enforcement. Like, who are the people that decide and then are trained?
For the magic cops?
Yeah, like the anti-magic mages. Because they gotta be wizards that are specifically trained on how to take down other wizards.
All right, J.K. Rowling, if you're listening to my podcast, I want Harry Potter universe Law and Order, the television series. Boom, boom, dun, 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 dun. So first it starts off with the cops, the magic cops that are investigating whatever the crime of the day is. They pick up the bad guys, and then the magic lawyers take over. And we go to the courtroom, and somebody gets sent off to Azkaban, and the world carries on.
I want Hogwarts cops. Like, I want, like shaky cam following, like, the magic SWAT teams into buildings. That's what I want.
Okay, there's no denying that I find this universe to be enchanting. Like, I am amongst the acolytes that just can't get enough of this. We went to Universal Studios in Orlando and went to the parts of the park where they've converted it into this world, and it's spellbinding. They give you a little wand and you walk around and it has, I don't know, an RF chip or something in it, and you can just wave it at parts of the scenery and interact with it. You can make fountains shoot up and dragons fly and flame come out of things, and then you ride the roller coasters and there are people dressed up. It just is mind blowing. And we went this whole universe gathered enough momentum early enough that they didn't fully decommission the movie studio. So in London, near London, there's the Warner Brothers movie studios where they filmed a lot of this, and they've retained all the props and costumes and sets and converted it into a park. But it's not a park like where you go and ride on rides, but where you just go see all this stuff. So there's like a complete life, quarter scale model of Hogwarts Castle. There's there's Diagon Alley, there's the Great Hall, all the costumes and props in the Hogwarts Express. It was fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough. If you have any tie to this universe and you want to see something, don't go to Orlando, go to London and go to the studio. Oh my gosh, it was fantastic.
I cannot be farther on the other end of the spectrum from you. Like, the amount of excitement and just pure joy coming off of you is just so opposite that I feel for Harry Potter.
Are you going to come out of the closet as a Harry Potter hater?
I am. I don't get it. Like, this is
all right.
Like, when we're talking about fantasy universes, this is by far nowhere near anywhere a good one. Like, I'm watching all these movies, and I'm sitting in the back of the room like, why doesn't he just shoot him? Why doesn't he just shoot him? Why doesn't he just shoot him? Like, there are so many modern technologies that, like, the books just completely blow off. Like, they don't exist entirely. Like, it blows my mind that they, like, oh, well, we're wizards and it's different. Like, that's fine, but you still live on this planet, right? You've heard of this stuff. And I was completely...
Yeah, but you've struggled with this your whole life. Like, the game just makes it so you can't shoot the non-player character because you just can't.
Well, it's plot armor. We talked about that earlier in the movie.
Right.
Like, I get it. Guns in Harry Potter would be a problem. You can't have a school shooting at Hogwarts.
Well, they also have a death spell, and it's one word, and everyone knows it.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't have to say anything to shoot you, Ben. Like, I can do it completely silently. Like, I don't know. Like, it just feels like that it tried to be, like, existing in its own universe, and it just should have been. It just should have existed in its own fantasy universe and not try to integrate with ours. That's the biggest flaw in Harry Potter for me, is that the key... Like, I was talking to you earlier about this. There is a book series, the White Mage series. And if you read it, you start reading the first book, and it feels like a blatant ripoff of Harry Potter from, like, almost like the first half of the first book. But I promise you it's not. And because it does an excellent job at integrating modern society and actual technology that exists into this magical world that they spin around this person that was a muggle their whole life and gets sucked into this magical world.
There's no denying that she didn't tap into this latent appetite for, this magical universe hidden from our view, laid on top of our own. There was this massive demand for this. I mean, there's no parallel to it in the amount of success it's had in our lifetime. But that is really far afield from the question of the legitimacy of the Ministry of Magic. You're saying at the end the fact that it was filled with acolytes of a evil shadow organization means that it was never legitimate to begin with.
I don't think it was legitimate. The parts that we see are like everybody that we interact with from the Ministry is some kind of pawn of the big bad guy who's not even alive. So yeah, I think it's not legitimate. Okay.
I'm going to disagree with you on this one just because I haven't mostly tonight. So, yeah, I'm going to say it's legitimate. Just because corruption exists doesn't mean it's not legitimate. Effectiveness.
I mean, there's a handful of situations where, like, yeah, magic gets kind of exposed, but it's only in tabloids. Nobody believes it. And if this comprehensive, enormous magical universe exists and coincides with the modern world and it is completely unheard of, then sure. Obviously, they have to have been effective up to this point, right?
Right.
Okay. So I'll give effectiveness a yes.
All right. So lifestyle.
Okay, so...
I'm going to go back and I'm going to make a clip of just those 3 sets of noises you just made and just have that saved as a file that I can bring up at need.
All right, so I made those noises because I'm going to put the thickest qualifier on this that I can, in that if it was me, personally, living in the Harry Potter universe, and I'm not a complete moron, and so I have both my laptop and the magic to charge it without, like, plugging it into a wall, then yeah, of course that would be a great universe to live in. It's like the tent that is tiny.
Get out of here, owl! You just pooped on my window. I'm sending an email.
Well, think about, like, just this idea that they had that little tiny tent, and when you walked inside, it was like a 1,500 square foot apartment. Like, just that concept alone. Like, if I could do nothing but that spell, I would be a billionaire. So yeah. I living in the Harry Potter universe would be great.
You're right. Just the access to this thing, any one thing, if you just pull at the thread, the whole world falls apart.
Yeah, basically. So that's why the qualifier is if it's me living in the Harry Potter universe and I can do magic. Yeah, absolutely, sounds great.
All right.
If I'm just a guy, if I'm just a muggle on the streets of London that has no idea what's going on, and all of a sudden the sky erupts with skull snakes, no, then I'm out.
This is the Bad at Magic podcast. We are muggles. We're bad at magic.
We're living the muggle life. I forgot.
Yeah.
Then no. Because we could be living in that universe now. And we've already said this is the darkest timeline. So no, I don't want that.
Yeah, so the one guy in the Fantastical Beasts one that's kind of set in like a period New York, I don't even know what, that kind of gets inaugurated into their universe as a Muggle and found out about him, and then they just hit him with the Men in Black blinky thing and erase his memory. And
so easy to
You haven't watched the Fantastical Beasts
I have
movies?
not watched the Fantastical Beasts movies. Are they any good?
No. I watched the first one. I refuse to watch the second one. It's just no.
Man, you were you were fanboying pretty hard for Harry Potter a few minutes ago.
Okay, so my wife, I got swept up in the Harry Potter mania back in the early 2000s, where we were waiting for the next book, and this anticipation was rising, and everyone knew how many books there were going to be because, well, she planned it out from the beginning. You go to school for this long, and there was going to be one book each year of school, so we know how many it's going to be, and the new books are coming out, so Alicia would get it and she would devour it in like the first 2 days, and then she'd hand it to me and I would start reading it. I think one came out and I actually was reading it before her, but whatever. I was reading the books and I was okay with the books. Like, I didn't love them, but I was okay with it. But when the film started to come out, oh man, Josh, there was, I think, I don't want to, I hope I'm not overstating this. I can probably find a video that backs this up, but I think there was this renaissance happening in Hollywood where like they had found this intellectual property that provided this opportunity to create this rich cinematic universe where it could be done in the way that Peter Jackson did the Lord of the Rings universe. He knew from the start what he wanted to do. He filmed all 3 films together, so there's this great continuity of the same actors playing the same characters and those kinds of things. And for them to take, this core group of children and adults that represented the faculty and students of Hogwarts and watch them grow up in this beautiful universe. And then they hired expert directors and fantastic cinematographers, and they had costumers and set builders and visionaries that just made something that to me was kind of weak writing by an amateur author into this fully fleshed out magical universe. It completely wrapped me in. I just adore it. The movies.
You are so meta with your fantasy and your fiction intake. It disgusts me. You just gotta forget all of this stuff and just enjoy the story for what it is. And this is why I don't like the Harry Potter movies, because the story is not great.
So one of the directors, I think it was Iñárritu, who directed I think the 3rd or 4th film. There was a minor magical artifact that was a supporting character in the films called the Whomping Willow. It was just a tree that was outside of Hogwarts campus, and it had a personality. It was very cranky, and if you got too close, it would hit you or grab things and throw them or whatever. And he imagined this thing so well, it was better than it was in my imagination where I read the book, where he used the tree to show the transitions of the seasons, even though the characters occasionally interacted with it. He would pan out to outside of Hogwarts Castle and see the Whomping Willow. And I love one scene where it goes from summer to autumn, or from autumn to winter. The Whomping Willow is there, its leaves change color, and then they all fall off right on the ground. But then he established that as a visual element for showing us the passage of time. So he would cut to the Whomping Willow, you would see all of its blooms pop out, boom, it's spring. Then cut to the Whomping Willow, you see all the leaves come out green, foof, it's summer. Then all the leaves change colors, foof, it's autumn. And then all the leaves fall off, foof, it's winter. And it was a beautiful visual element that wasn't really contained in the books that showed the richness of this universe. Oh, I loved it. So, yeah.
Spoilers for Harry Potter, by the way.
So effectiveness, we established lifestyle. That's it, man. We've reached the end of our 4 intellectual properties we sought to undertake for examining bad at politics.
Which is hilarious. We can go back at every other intellectual property we have ever talked about and talk about the government that's in the background of these stupid movies and talk about their governments, which may or may not be a thing that we do from time to time if we need to pad out these podcasts. But in a time where we have such political divisiveness, at least in the United States, it's good to take a step back and really just enjoy the fact that we are living what is essentially a good life. You and I have this opportunity to sit here and rant at each other about made-up fictional governments. And sometimes that just feels better than dealing with the problems of the day.
I love it. I love where you took that. I was thinking the same thing. That even though, it feels like there's all this chaos and disagreement amongst people in the world today, we live in a time where we're relatively prosperous and free to talk about what we want about and live how we want. And we can imagine how we might be happier in the Star Trek universe or in the Harry Potter universe. But we have it pretty good.
Honestly, yeah. I think so, too.
All right. So... there was one thing I wanted to bring up, and then we'll bring it to a close. You and I had kind of talked about the fact that it's been a while since we've done a book review, and you have not read Super Freakonomics by Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt. And I think that would be a great one to do, but I found that sometimes it's too short of a period to bring up a book and then review it the next period. So let's give it 2, and we'll do that. We'll do a book review of Super Freakonomics in episode 32. So listeners, if you want to join in a book review, highly recommend Super Freakonomics by Dubner and Levitt. And even though it's the second book in this series, it's a nonfiction book. It's not, you don't have to read the first one to get the second one. But let me give you a little taste. Go ahead.
Oh, I was honestly going to do the same thing. Like, I have not read Super Freakonomics, but I have read Freakonomics. And this is one of those books I mentioned before. I tend to like books by economists because they are about the math and the mechanics of how the world actually works. And all of the vignettes in Freakonomics were like mind-blowing in how they open your senses and your perspective to how things really work in the world.
Yes, it's very apolitical. They're not making an assumption. They're just looking at the math.
Yes.
So here's some questions answered by Super Freakonomics. How is a street prostitute like a department store Santa? Why are doctors so bad at washing their hands? I know this is from a few years ago, but that's a great one. How much good do car seats actually do, as in child car seats?
Ooh, interesting question.
Yeah, so these are some of the issues grappled with in Super Freakonomics. Highly recommend it. Join us, and we'll review it in episode 32.
Sounds good. In the meantime, thank you for listening to our Bad at Magic podcast. If you enjoy what we do, please recommend us to a friend. If you can't get enough of us, please consider becoming one of our patrons on Patreon, showing some love to the show. If you want to get involved with the debate and talk about how Ben and I really screwed up the Ministry of Magic,
I know our listeners are going to want to tell us, particularly Harry Potter. I feel like that's one they really are going to want to weigh in on.
I think I can hear your wife typing from the future as we're saying this. But go ahead and shoot us a comment either on the Facebook page or on the Reddit. If you happen to be sleeping next to the person that talked about how bad the Ministry of Magic is, please feel free to yell at me in my ear. Ben, you have anything else?
No, thanks for listening to the Bad at Magic podcast.